across South Wales and southwest England, again bringing a snow risk here. Further north, a bit more cloud across the Midlands and Wales, but much of northern Britain dry, sunny and cold. After we start well below freezing, we get up to 3 or 4 Celsius. But a greater risk through Wednesday evening of some significant snow. Parts of the South Midlands, parts of South Wales, and particularly across southern England, there could be a build-up of snow. Disruptive snow is possible as we head through Wednesday night and into Thursday morning. That's from this area of low pressure. And then, as we head through Thursday and Friday, another low comes in. This one's further north, bringing the snow risk further north as these weather fronts come into parts of Wales, northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. So warnings in place for Thursday and Friday too.
Tonight on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Dubes & Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
It's 12 noon, a very good afternoon to you, and you're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and let's take you straight to Colchester because the King and Queen Consort are there, and you can see them there walking to Colchester Castle, away from the King, because this is the royal affirmation of the city status for Colchester, which was announced back in November 2022, and we have, as ever, a large crowd greeting the King and Queen Consort, and we can tell you that inside the castle we are expecting Alice in Wonderland and also the Mad Hatter, played by actors from the Mercury Theatre, all to celebrate the fact that this is also Essex Year of the Book. So we've got both the King and Camilla heading then to the local library to join people from Age UK and also children's authors to celebrate that very fact, and then off to Colchester Zoo later. So they've just got into the castle. We'll update you with the very latest on that. Also coming up this afternoon, the new law set to be introduced shortly by Suella Braverman to push the boundaries of international law. That's according to the Home Secretary herself. Well, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer already saying the plans are unworkable. Lawyers say it will lead to a series of challenges. So will it all really stop the boats, as Rishi Sunak has promised? We'll get our own expert legal view, the latest from Westminster, and reaction from France and whether it will work. Oh, snow. Yes, the Met Office warnings for snow, ice and plunging temperatures now extended to more parts of the UK in the coming days. Scotland and the northeast of England badly hit already today, but it could be now heading your way. We'll find out where exactly with our expert weatherman John Ketley, preparing for what's expected to be the coldest night of the year so far. Well, let's warm you up too. On your marks, get set, go. Eurovision tickets on sale now for that contest being hosted by Liverpool in May on behalf of Ukraine. And we're told Ukrainian refugees being offered discount tickets at just £20. Congratulations, as Cliff Richard once sang. Latest news headlines now with Tamsin.
Mark, thanks very much. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 2 minutes past 12. The Home Secretary says proposed laws to tackle small boat crossings will push the boundaries of international law. The government is set to unveil new legislation shortly to remove illegal migrants and ban them from ever returning to the UK. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has argued the bill will take back control of UK borders. Suella Braverman says the proposed laws will stop illegal migrants exploiting the system.
We are committed to helping those in need, like the hundreds of thousands of people we have supported from Ukraine, Afghanistan and Hong Kong in recent years. But it's not fair that people who travel through a string of safe countries and then come to the UK illegally can jump the queue and game our system. This bill will bring an end to that.
But Labour's Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds says the proposal is nothing new.
I mean, how many times have we heard this? Isn't it an exact rerun of the arguments over sending people to Rwanda? The government says we're going to tackle this, people won't like it. And what happens? Nothing happens. They get their plans in place. The problem gets worse. And why does it get worse? Because they don't tackle criminal gangs. They go for the people who are the victims of this rather than the criminal gangs behind it. And then second of all, they don't process any asylum claims. If you're only processing 2% of the claims that were made last year, which is where the government is at, you don't know who should be in this country and who shouldn't be.
Leaked WhatsApp messages suggest former Health Secretary Matt Hancock considered withholding funding for a learning disability centre to pressure an MP to back new COVID restrictions. The messages obtained by the Daily Telegraph showed Mr Hancock and an aide had discussed warning MP James Daly that the centre would be off the table if he rebelled. A spokesperson for Matt Hancock says what is being accused never happened and that the leaked message exchange is only a partial account of the conversation. Sue Gray's plan to work for the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer may have breached civil service rules. The Paymaster General, Jeremy Quinn, told the Commons that the Partygate investigator may have broken 4 rules, including failing to gain prior approval. But Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner has accused the Tories of pursuing conspiracy theories. The gender pay gap in the UK has widened, with men now paid 14.4% more than women. The accountancy firm PwC's report puts the increase down to a sharp rise in childcare costs, which has priced many women out of work altogether. It's warned at the rate the pay gap is closing, it will now take more than 50 years to reach gender pay parity. MPs are warning that ammunition reserves in the UK and with NATO allies have fallen to dangerously low levels as they seek to keep Ukraine supplied. The Commons Defence Committee says rebuilding Britain's stockpile could take at least a decade, putting national security at risk. The committee also says the way in which Western governments procure armaments is not fit for purpose. Cancer Research UK estimates around 75,000 GP appointments would be freed up every month if smoking stopped in England. The charity says it remains the biggest cause of cancer-related deaths and is urging the government to do more to prevent young people from picking up the habit and to help current smokers quit. Parts of northern England and Scotland have been blanketed in snow as the start of a cold spell, with temperatures forecast to drop to -15 in some parts. More than 4 inches of snow have fallen in northern Scotland and around 8 inches are forecast for later this week. Tonight is expected to be the coldest night of the year, with snow warnings remaining in areas until the weekend. Meteorologist John Hammond says it's not unusual for this time of year.
a whole reservoir of Arctic air which has been freezing all through the winter and getting colder and colder and colder, and you only need a northerly wind for that Arctic air to be unleashed across us, and that's what's happening. Of course, it's going to be even more of a shock to the system given how mild it's been through most of the winter. So some of us haven't seen any snowfall at all. So yeah, a bit of a shock through March, yeah, because we don't normally associate March with snowfall. But is it that unusual? Not really. In fact, you can get snowfall at Easter some years.
The King and Queen Consort have arrived in Colchester to celebrate its new city status. Colchester was awarded the city title during the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations last year. The couple will visit the city's zoo and castle, as well as Colchester Library, where they'll join charities Age UK and the Silver Line for tea with local volunteers. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Tamsin, thank you very much indeed. So, Rishi Sunak saying he will take back control of the country's borders once more, promising to stop the boats, as he said. This, of course, was one of his New Year pledges. Today, the new legislation, which is set to be announced in the next half an hour or so, will introduce the measures aimed at removing migrants entering the UK on the boats, but Home Secretary Suella Braverman herself acknowledging it will push the boundaries, as she said, of international law. So does that mean it has any chance of succeeding? Well, our Home and Security Editor Mark White joins us now from outside the Home Office, because clearly Keir Starmer for Labour has indicated that this may be partly political ahead of the local elections in May.
Well, there's no doubt, Mark, that it is certainly a tougher approach from the government. Thus far, we had, with the last raft of tougher legislation that was introduced to Parliament, promised that anyone coming to the UK through irregular routes, in other words, on small boats on the back of lorries, would go to the back of the queue in the government's parlance, really, in terms of their asylum process. But now, of course, this new legislation promises that anyone coming on irregular routes, all but a handful of exceptions, they will not qualify for asylum at all. I think what is certain, just like the Rwanda policy as announced by Boris Johnson almost a year ago, which is still stuck in legal challenges in our courts, is this legislation will also be bogged down by numerous legal challenges in the months ahead. And all the while, of course, as the weather improves, then more boats will continue to come across the English Channel. On Wasteland near Calais, another migrant camp has sprung up. Hundreds of tents and other makeshift structures have been erected, offering shelter to those planning to cross illegally to the UK in the days and weeks ahead. Further up the coast, the area's largest camp, along the railway tracks near Dunkirk, has now been cleared. Evidence that authorities here are certainly trying to disperse those planning to cross the Channel. On the UK side, the government is also stepping up the pressure. New legislation, which we're told will make claiming asylum all but impossible for those entering the UK illegally, and will include a lifetime ban on claiming asylum.
Any policies that we put in place now are not some ideological or intellectual exercise. They are practical steps that's going to allow the Home Office to hopefully get their act together and to work with the democratically elected politicians to act upon what people actually want them to do.
After months of construction work, miles of security fencing is now in place around the beaches at Gravelly near Dunkirk, the site of many of the small boat launches. But in recent weeks, people smugglers have simply moved location. And many are sceptical that new legislation will make any real difference in managing a crisis that saw more than 45,000 people cross the Channel in flimsy inflatables last year.
The returns agreements are the nub on which the entire policy lands, and if that fails, if there aren't places to send all of these illegal immigrants that the government is planning to detain, then it will all fall apart and it will all be for naught. So that's a very important bit of the plan.
It's almost a year since then Prime Minister Boris Johnson made bold predictions about the government's new plan to send many asylum seekers to Rwanda. Since then, not a single flight has taken off for that country. However determined Rishi Sunak may be to ensure his plan has more success, it's certain there will be no end of challenges from those determined to block the government's latest proposals. Well, within the hour, the Home Secretary will be standing up in the Commons and delivering her speech setting out this new legislation. Now, key to that will be the returns agreements and, of course, the other treaties such as the Rwanda deal, because without these treaties and deals, this policy will fall at the first hurdle, because denying people asylum is one thing, but if there's nowhere to send these people to once they've been denied asylum for coming to this country via an irregular route, then clearly, as I say, this legislation would be unworkable.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. And as you say, we're expecting that statement in the Commons in about 15 minutes' time. But let's speak now in the studio to Ivan Sampson, immigration lawyer, who's joining us. Ivan, thank you very much indeed for your time from Privatus. Basically, the words that Suella Braverman herself used is pushing the boundaries of international law. What does that actually mean? Because one assumes law is either black or white. Or black or white. Either, you're within the law or you're outside it.
I wish that were the case, which is why you get courts adjudicating when there's a conflict. No, so she's going to make a 19B statement, and what that means is she's going to disengage with parts of the Human Rights Act. We have an obligation to consider asylum applications. We have an obligation to scrutinise them carefully and fairly and properly, and not to remove people till all their appeals processes have been concluded. So this whole policy, I think, will only work if they can get Rwanda across the line. Because if I'm an asylum seeker and I'm thinking, well, if I go to the UK, my ultimate destination is Rwanda, then that's going to be an effective deterrent. But
that was the government's line, of course.
Yes, and that's their plan. But the problem is that this new illegal migration bill will be subject to numerous challenges. And it doesn't really matter which government's in power with this problem. We all agree that uncontrolled border crossings is unacceptable.
But in terms of this new illegal migration bill, which we're expecting to be put to the Commons now fairly shortly, as you were saying, it puts on the Home Secretary a legal duty to remove as soon as reasonably practicable to Rwanda or a safe third country. Now, as you've indicated, the channel to Rwanda effectively is closed by all the legal challenges going on. We can't, or we haven't got the agreements with the rest of Europe because we're outside the EU. What is the third-party channel where we can actually put these people back through the system, if you like?
I mean, the third-party channel is Rwanda, but they'll need other countries. I mean, it'll only work if the flow of migrants stop. If it doesn't, if it continues to rise, how much can Rwanda take?
Yeah.
How many years can they keep accepting asylum seekers? And the other important thing is reasonably practicable. I mean, they've got to make asylum decision within a reasonable time. It's taking a year to get a second interview, so they've left themselves wiggle room to say, look, it's not practical at this time because of legal challenges.
Right. So
I think these are headlining. The ultimate, I asked myself, why is Rishi Sunak doing this? The ultimate goal is to, in my view, to get us out the ECHR. Because if they fail in this migration, if they fail to get this policy off the ground, it's only because they're going to blame the European Convention on Human Rights. And the ultimate goal, I believe, in this government is for us to come out of that convention.
Really? Even though we were one of the architects, one of the signatories originally? I mean, and that would effectively be breaking international law, wouldn't it?
Well, not if we're not a member of that convention anymore. So we could actually
would take a wall home?
Yes, I mean, we'd be joining Russia and Belarus. But look, because we drafted, doesn't mean we can't come out of it. I don't believe we should come out of it. I think it would be a really bad look internationally if we were to come out of that convention.
So, and just to sum up then, with all this being put forward, it's not going to stop the boats then, effectively, which is the political statement that Rishi Sunak made at the beginning of the year, one of the 5 pledges.
Indeed, and you've got to get the message across. And it's got to work. If it never gets off the ground, just like the Rwanda policy, didn't stop the boats. So if this doesn't work, the boats will continue. The only way to stop the boats is stop them getting on the boats in the first place. I mean, that's just common sense.
Which is Labour's point, basically saying give the money to the criminal investigating the units which can stop the people smuggling and the people putting the boats off the beaches.
I mean, I spoke to Mehmet before we came on, and he's a good experience of this. The secret, the intelligence service work closely together. The problem is, it's so vast. Right. The border is so vast. The really amount of resources you need to put into that is enormous. But that's what it's going to take.
Right, well, we have another lawyer standing by to get our own legal opinion on this. Let's bring in Janzeb Guman, who's head of immigration with another firm of solicitors and barristers, Lexlaw. Thank you very much indeed for your time. What could the challenges be then, as Ivan was indicating, this Section 19(1)(b), I think, from the Statement of Human Rights Act? Presumably, that does leave all sorts of challenges open all the way up to judicial review.
Thank you for having me. So the UK is also a party to the Refugee Convention 1951, as well as the 1967 Protocol, and it's got obligations under it to consider these refugees' claims and refugee status itself being declaratory. The policy in effect, it might mean that the United Kingdom is in breach of international law in that sense as well. So we have to consider well beyond the European Convention of Human Rights.
So, as Ivan was saying, that perhaps the government's deciding it's going to go for broke, but how would the challenges work? Would this be each individual, each case would be a challenge, or would there be a test case that would apply to everybody?
So it could be a test case that is then applied to various other cases as well. There's the local courts of the United Kingdom, where the case is going to be tested first. And then, of course, there is the European Court. So Rishi Sunak, if we do withdraw from the European Convention for Human Rights, then the case, of course, does not go to the European courts. However, what does that mean for human rights in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, and is that being seen by the legal fraternity as the nuclear option? I mean, if they really do go down that road, we're cocking a snook at all international law.
I agree. So I can only comment from the legal perspective. Legal perspective being we are currently signatories to the Refugee Convention as well as the European Convention of Human Rights. Pursuant to those, we do have obligations which are currently in effect. In my legal opinion, we do have an obligation to consider these claims. The new bill might mean that we are in breach of our obligations under international law. Hence pushing the boundaries of international law.
The other aspect to this, and this I know has exercised a lot of our viewers who've been in touch. I mean, we're spending £7 million a day on the various hotels for those people waiting for their claims to be processed. We're spending 140 million, or have spent 140 million pounds in Rwanda with preparations there to receive people. And now I assume we could be paying a lot of legal fees to various legal firms who are going to process the claims procedures. I mean, it's going to end up a very expensive and slow business.
Yes, that is correct. So it is estimated if we have 65,000 people arriving at the UK's coast, we might spend £1.4 billion in order to detain them for 6 months. And in terms of legal costs, of course, the government or the taxpayer, in fact, is going to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds in defending this policy in the domestic courts as well as the European courts.
Well, we'll obviously see what the Home Secretary's got to say in about 9 minutes' time. Janzeb Guman, thank you very much for your aspect in terms of assessing what we might be hearing. Let's just bring in Ivan once more. If the Home Secretary had come to you for a bit of legal advice, what would you have told her?
Well, look, there's no sanctions for breaching these refugee conventions. I mean, we talk about breaching conventions, but what's the sanction for the government? What would happen? it makes us look really bad in the international community. And that's really important to maintain our reputation and our sense of morality.
This is not just with Europe, this is worldwide.
Absolutely. I mean, every country in the world is, almost every country is a member, other than, as I said, Russia and Belarus. Russia doesn't allow any asylum seekers. They would remove them immediately, and this policy is akin to that. The advice I would give to the Secretary of State, safe legal routes, which she's doing, give her credit.
That was going to be my next question. We haven't actually had any detail. I mean, we may get details in the next 9 minutes, but that would be basically the get out of jail card, would it? That we are providing this, so therefore people will be moved to this new channel.
Indeed, the combination of if she does get this policy off the ground, which I'm not sure that's going to happen.
Right.
But let's assume she does, and it stops the boat crossings, then people will be forced to the safe legal routes. Now, we, at the moment, I mean, they're talking about 20,000 and giving Parliament a vote on it. We should really be accepting about 100,000. And I think the UNCHR can get involved. Looking at each country's GDP, they should make an assessment.
This is an overall figure rather than the boats crossing in terms of the net.
20,000 is the figure that's been bandied around. Not enough.
Yeah, because we're looking at the moment, what, 3,000 just in the boats in the first 2 months of this. So that's heading towards 45,000 plus by the end of the year just on the boats.
Absolutely. And so we've got to take our fair share. Right. We must not take a measly amount of 20,000. 100,000 is about the right for us.
OK. We shall see what emerges in the Commons fairly shortly. For the moment, thank you for that. As we say, we're expecting Suella Braverman on her feet now at 12:30. Crossing to the Commons for that, but also updating you on the snow. It's on its way. Could it be hitting you? We'll be finding out from John Ketley, no less. But we'll take a break now.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Live to the House of Commons fairly shortly in a few minutes' time. Home Secretary Suella Braverman due on her feet with this ministerial statement on the illegal migration bill, as it's called, which she herself has acknowledged will push the boundaries of international law. And, of course, we've got our expert lawyers to actually assess how far those boundaries are being pushed. But there's a political element as well. Let's cross to Westminster and join our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, because down at the heart of this politically is this promise or pledge from Rishi Sunak at the beginning of the year, stop the boats. All sorts of questions from the lawyers and indeed immigration officials as to whether it will do that.
Yeah, indeed, not least of all whether
all these measures the government are going to announce today are fundamentally going to deter people from making that crossing. As you say, this is one of the key planks that Rishi Sunak has put forward as part of that 5-point plan at the start of the year that he wants to be judged on, which is stopping the small boat crisis. If that is not the case, if these measures do not work, or indeed, even if they're not implemented because of the House of Lords or legal challenges or for whatever reason, that could be a big challenge politically for the Prime Minister, not least of all in many red wall seats or indeed sites in the southeast of England, particularly in Kent, where this is a major issue, where there is popular demand for changes to be made, where the government have frankly made a big issue of this and a big commitment. And you're right, this could very easily feed into the next general election. Now, we are going to hear from the Prime Minister a little later on today. He's going to have a press conference in all of this. But I do think, frankly, this is a really key test for the government amongst Conservative backbenchers, for the general public too, and also a question about government competence, if you like. Many feel, even aside from the numbers involved, that getting to grips with this is a sign of how the government can manage things, not least of all borders post-Brexit. And another key challenge, of course, will be the cooperation of France. And we know that the Prime Minister is going to meet Emmanuel Macron, the French President, a little later on this week in Paris.
And how far do you believe they will push it? I mean, I even hear that our lawyer in the studio is suggesting that there may be this sort of nuclear option of just leaving the Convention on Human Rights. And certainly Suella Braverman in her interview with Liam last week, our exclusive interview on GB News, indicating that perhaps, would still be a consideration.
It's not been taken off the table, and there are a lot of Conservative backbenchers who would like it to happen. There are cabinet ministers who would like it to happen, I think, not least of all the Home Secretary. In the end, though, I'm not entirely sure the Prime Minister is very keen on going down that path. This is a Prime Minister who has thus far built his reputation on being conciliatory, on trying to work things out, on trying to come up with a plan within the frameworks that currently exist. I don't think he's someone who wants to necessarily go to war on that particular issue. There are a whole range of questions about the damage it might well cause the government, not just internally but internationally as well. So I think it's pretty unlikely that Rishi Sunak would ever go as far as that. But there is this sense, I think, again, where earlier on this year the government were willing to have fights with the courts, willing really to take on the opponents about this particular issue. But in the end, Rishi Sunak knows that ultimately the public will only thank the government, not by having rows, not by seeming to be frustrated, not by seeming to blame others, but actually by dealing with this crisis itself. And again, Rwanda is part of that solution as well. We know he spoke to President Kagame last night on the telephone, but again, there are concerns there about just the capacity that Rwanda has. Even if those flights can take off, the capacity that country has to deal with the sheer numbers of people involved. And then you add to that as well, Mark, the current backlog that's in place that the government are still struggling with. Only 3% of asylum cases that were submitted last year have thus far been dealt with.
Just to sort of wind the clock back a little bit, one of the things we were promised, of course, was better cooperation, closer cooperation with the French, and we'd have the sort of boots on the ground, if you like, or on the beaches over in France. So we've got this meeting, as you said, on Friday. Where are we in that closer cooperation with the French, bearing in mind, as we've discussed here, they've got this huge coastline to try and police, all the way down perhaps even to Le Havre?
There was a hope, I think, within government that there would be a return scheme, if you like, that the UK could potentially return some of the migrants that have crossed the English Channel back to where they originated from in northern France. Now, it does not look like the French are going to go quite that far. I think there will be a further commitment in terms of, you say, police resources and beach patrols. But in the end, that coastline is so enormous. And that's why this is really tricky. That's why this commitment by the Prime Minister to essentially end this is incredibly tricky, because first of all, you have to try and first of all deter people from turning up to the north of France to try and make that journey. Are people really going to be deterred by these new measures? And second of all, even if they're undeterred, can they be prevented? And at the moment, there are lots of suggestions that the French have not been kind of doing as much as they could, but they have managed to stop some crossings, even with those efforts. It's not entirely clear, though, if they really chuck the kitchen sink of it, whether they could really prevent it altogether.
OK, well, we understand Steve Barclay, Health Secretary, still on his feet in the Commons, will be going live to the Chamber when Suella Braverman is speaking. But I think it looks as if it's time for you to repent your sins for the moment, Darren, which may take you some time, of course. But back to you as soon as you've done that. Let's turn to Ivan once more in the studio. Where are we on Rwanda? What is happening on the situation we're in?
Well, as you know, the government was successful. It went back again to the Court of Appeal, and it's in the appellate courts now. So we're waiting for a final decision by the courts on that.
And any indication how long that could take? Because, as you said, clearly, if the government has the ability to start the flights again, at least they've got the legal excuse, if you like, that they can put this into action.
There's no indication from the courts. I think that if they succeed getting a final decision without any further appeal rights, that's a key policy, a key brick in the government's wall to get this all shored up. So if that gets through, I think the government could well make this policy work.
Right. The other aspect in terms of getting the system to work is the backlog, of course, in the asylum claims. And a lot of the charities have said that's really where the government should be putting its energies at the moment, is sorting out the long list of claims.
Yes, and I'd like to know why is there a backlog. I mean, we've all heard commentators saying, well, we need more people, more resources, better training. But the government hasn't really responded to explain why there's a backlog.
So it's not the physical numbers coming through the system, then?
No, I don't believe it is, because we've, in fact, the numbers have been quite consistent. And if you go back, say, 10 years, let's say, the asylum applications, 90% were decided within 6 months. Now, if you're getting more people coming across, surely you need more decision makers to expand the capability of deciding those cases.
Especially
you can't sit on your hands.
Yeah, as Mark White has been reporting for us, it appears that some of the Albanian single men coming across are being coached in terms of how they put their asylum claim when they arrive here.
I don't understand the Albanian problem at all, because we've got strong laws to deal with Albanians who don't have a genuine asylum claim. Firstly, they come from a deemed safe country.
Yeah.
So they can be refused even to entertain their asylum claim.
Because there's nothing to run away from.
Exactly. Yeah. And then we've got many of them claim to be trafficked to try and avoid being sent back. The same mechanisms we have for the asylum claim, we can use for the trafficking claims.
Right.
The national referral mechanism needs to be re-looked at, and we should be able to deny Albanians using that as a reason to remain in the UK. And they can do that and remove them within 2 weeks, in my view.
Right, so why hasn't that happened?
The mechanisms are not there. I mean, I think the government's fighting so many fires on different counts, and I think it needs a proper look at the Albanian problem. We need an immigration...
Are they looking at the wrong mechanism here, then, in what we're about to see in the Commons, in this illegal migration bill?
Well, I think they need to do something about the illegal boat crossings. We all accept it's unacceptable.
Yeah.
Both parties agree on that.
And the risk it's putting individuals.
And the risk is putting individuals in harm. And, you know, babies and women. So we know we've got to do something about that. And I think the parties really need to come together to come up with a solution. And it needs to be a proper... whether this new policy works, time will tell. But there's nobody coming up with good solutions. That's what I've seen.
Right, OK. And one last thought, because we are expecting a Home Secretary any minute, is the fact that with more people being detained, whether I think she's about to come on her feet. Let's go to the Commons. Home Secretary Suella Braverman just taking a position at the dispatch box.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement about the government's illegal migration bill. 2 months ago, the Prime Minister made a promise to the British people. He said that anyone entering this country illegally will be detained and swiftly removed. No half measures. The illegal migration bill will fulfil that promise. It will allow us to stop the boats that are bringing tens of thousands to our shores in flagrant breach of both our laws and the will of the British people. Now, the United Kingdom must always support the world's most vulnerable, Since 2015, we've given sanctuary to nearly 500,000 people. These include 150,000 people from Hong Kong, 160,000 people from Ukraine, 25,000 Afghans fleeing the Taliban. Indeed, my own parents, Mr. Speaker, decades ago found security and opportunity in this country, something for which my family is eternally grateful. Crucially, these are decisions supported by the British people, precisely because they were decisions made by the British people and their elected representatives, not by the people smugglers and other criminals breaking into Britain on a daily basis. For a government not to respond to waves of illegal migrants breaching our borders would be to betray the will of the people we were elected to serve. Now, the small boats problem is part of a larger global migration crisis. In the coming years, developed countries will face unprecedented levels with pressures from ever greater numbers of people leaving the developing world for places like the United Kingdom. Unless we act today, the problem will be worse tomorrow, and the problem is already unsustainable. Mr. Speaker, people are dying in the Channel. The volume of illegal arrivals has overwhelmed our asylum system. The backlog has ballooned to over 160,000. The asylum system now costs the British taxpayer £3 billion a year. Since 2018, some 85,000 people illegally entered the United Kingdom by small boat, 45,000 of them in 2022 alone. All travelled through multiple safe countries in which they could and should have claimed asylum. Many came from safe countries like Albania. Almost all passed through France. The vast majority, 74% in 2021, were adult males under the age of 40, rich enough to pay criminal gangs thousands of pounds for passage. Upon arrival, most are accommodated in hotels across the country, costing the British taxpayer around £6 million a day. The risk remains that these individuals just disappear, and when we try to remove them, they turn our generous asylum laws against us to prevent removal. The need for reform is obvious and is urgent. This government has not sat on its hands, Mr. Speaker. Since this Prime Minister took office, recognising the necessity of joint solutions with France, we've signed a new deal providing more technology and embedding British officers with French patrols. And I hope Friday's Anglo-French summit will further deepen that cooperation. We've created a new small boats operational command with over 700 new staff. We've doubled NCA funding to tackle the smuggling gangs. We've increased enforcement raids by 50%. We've signed a deal with Albania, which has already enabled the return of hundreds of illegal arrivals. And we're procuring accommodation, including on military land, to end the farce of accommodating migrants in hotels. But let's be honest, it's still not enough. In the face of today's global migration crisis, yesterday's laws are simply not fit for purpose. So to anyone proposing de facto open borders through unlimited safe and legal routes as the alternative, let's be honest, there are 100 million people around the world who could qualify for protection under our current laws. Let's be clear, they are coming here. We've seen a 500% increase in small boats crossings in 2 years. And this, Mr. Speaker, is the crucial point of this bill. They will not stop coming here until the world knows that if you enter Britain illegally, you will be detained and swiftly removed. Removed back to your country if it's safe, or to a safe country, a safe third country like Rwanda. And that is precisely what this bill will do. That is how we will stop the boats. Mr. Speaker, this bill enables detention of illegal arrivals without bail or judicial review within the first 28 days of detention until they can be removed. It puts a duty on the Home Secretary to remove illegal entrants and will radically narrow the number of challenges and appeals that can suspend removal. Only those under 18, medically unfit to fly, or at a real risk of serious and irreversible harm, an exceedingly high bar in the country we are removing them to, will be able to delay their removal. Any other claims will be heard remotely after removal. And when our Modern Slavery Act passed, the impact assessment envisaged 3,500 referrals a year. Last year, 17,000 referrals took on average 543 days to consider. Modern slavery laws are being abused to block removals. That's why we granted more than 50% of asylum requests from citizens of a safe European country and NATO ally, Albania. That's why this bill disqualifies illegal entrants from using modern slavery rules to prevent removal. Mr. Speaker, I won't address the bill's full legal complexities today. Some of the nation's finest legal minds have been and continue to be involved in its development. But I must say this. Rule 39 and the process that enabled the Strasbourg court to block at the last minute flights to Rwanda after our courts had refused injunctions was deeply flawed. Our ability to control our borders cannot be held back by an opaque process conducted late at night with no chance to make our case or even appeal decisions. That's why we've initiated discussions in Strasbourg to ensure their blocking orders meet a basic natural justice standard, one that prevents abuse of Rule 39s to thwart removal. And it's why the bill will set out the conditions for the UK's future compliance for such orders. Other countries share our dilemma and will understand the justice of our position. Our approach is robust and novel, which is why we can't make a definitive statement of compatibility under Section 19(1)(b) of the Human Rights Act. Of course, the UK will always seek to uphold international law, and I am confident that this bill is compatible with international obligations. And when we stop the boats, Mr. Speaker, the bill will introduce an annual cap to be determined by Parliament on the number of refugees the UK will settle via safe and legal routes. This will ensure an orderly system, considering local authority capacity for housing, public services and support. So to conclude, Mr. Speaker, the British people are famously a fair and patient people. But their sense of fair play has been tested beyond its limits, and they've seen the country taken for a ride. Their patience has run out. The law-abiding patriotic majority have said, enough is enough. This cannot and will not continue. Their government, this government, must act decisively, must act with determination, must act with compassion, must act with proportion. So make no mistake, this Conservative government, this Conservative Prime Minister will act now to stop the boats, and I commend the statement to the House.
Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A record 45,000 people crossed the Channel on dangerous small boats last year, up from just 280 4 years ago. In that short time, the government has allowed criminal gangs to take hold along the Channel and along our border. At the same time, convictions of people smugglers have halved, Home Office asylum decisions have collapsed, down 40%. The backlog and costly, inappropriate hotel use has soared. Removals of unsuccessful asylum seekers are down 80% on the last Labour government, and legal family reunion visas for refugees are down 40%. This is deeply damaging chaos. And there is no point in ministers trying to blame anyone else for it. They have been in power for 13 years. The asylum system is broken, and they broke it. We need serious action to stop dangerous boat crossings which are putting lives at risk and undermining border security. And that is why Labour has put forward plans for a cross-border police unit, for fast-track decisions and returns, to clear the backlog and end hotel use, and a new agreement with France and other countries. But instead, today's statement is Groundhog Day. The Home Secretary has said anyone who arrives illegally will be deemed inadmissible and either returned to the country they arrived from or a safe third country. Only that wasn't this Home Secretary, it was the last one. And that wasn't this bill, it was the last one, passed only a year ago, which did not work. And as part of last year's bill, the Home Office considered 18,000 people as inadmissible for the asylum system because they had travelled through safe third countries, but because they had no return agreements in place, just 21 of them were returned. That is 0.1%. The other 99.9% just carried on, often in hotels, at an extra cost of £500 million. And it didn't deter anyone. Even more boats arrived. So what is different this time? They still don't have any return agreements in place. The Home Secretary herself has admitted Rwanda is failing, and even if it gets going, it will only take a few hundred people. So what will happen to the other 99% of people under this bill? Now, she says she's going to detain them all, maybe for 28 days. She could tell us how many detention centres they will need and how much that will cost. But even if she does, what will happen when people leave 28-day detention? Will she make people destitute, so they just wander the streets in total chaos? Torture victims, Afghan interpreters, families with children? Or will she put them into indefinite taxpayer-funded accommodation? Never returned anywhere because they don't have the agreements with Europe in place, neither returned nor given sanctuary, never having their case resolved. Just forever in asylum accommodation and hotels. She may not call it the asylum system, but thousands more people are still going to be in it, nevertheless. And what does it mean for the promises that we made to the Afghan interpreters who served our country, but who were too late to make the last flight out of Kabul as the tyranny was closing in on them? Shameful. The government told them to flee and find another way here, and they told us to tell people that as well. But the resettlement scheme isn't helping them, and if they arrive in this country finally this afternoon, perhaps by travelling through Ireland to get here, they will only ever be illegal in the eyes of the government who relied on the sacrifices they made for us. So if the government was serious, it would be working internationally to get a proper new agreement in place with France and Europe, including return agreements and properly controlled and managed legal routes such as family reunion and reform of resettlement. Instead, this bill makes this harder, unilaterally choosing to decide no asylum cases at all, but expecting every other country to carry on. And they would work with Labour on our plan for a major new cross-border police unit to go after the criminal gangs. But instead, the Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party said yesterday we shouldn't go after the gangs because, well, they've existed for thousands of years. That is the disgraceful Tory attitude that's let the gangs off the hook and letting the gangs take hold. And one smuggler told Sky News yesterday that 3/4 of the smugglers live in Britain, yet barely any of them are being prosecuted, and they still haven't found the hundreds of children missing from asylum hotels who've been picked up by criminal gangs. They could be setting out a serious plan today, and we would work with them on it, and so would everyone across the country. Instead, it's just more chaos. They say no ifs, no buts, but all of us know they're going to spend the whole of the next year iffing and butting and looking for someone else to blame when it all goes wrong. Enough is enough. We can't afford any more of this slogans and not solutions, just government by gimmick, ramping up the rhetoric on refugees but picking fights simply to have someone else to blame when things go wrong. This bill isn't a solution. It is a con that risks making the chaos worse. Britain deserves better than this chaos. Britain is better than this.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her remarks, but forgive me, after 5 minutes of hysteria, histrionics and criticism, I'm still not clear. I've just got no idea what Labour's plan is. I'll assume the Shadow Home Secretary is still committed to scrapping our Rwanda partnership, as she said last year. I'll assume that the Leader of the Opposition still wants to close immigration removal centres, as he promised during his leadership campaign. The Shadow Home Secretary talks about safe and legal routes. I wonder what number they would cap that at. 500,000? A million? 5 million? She should be honest with this House and with the British people. What she really means is unlimited safe and legal routes. Open borders by the back door. She says get serious. Well, let's look at the facts, Mr. Speaker. The British people want to stop the boats. It's one of the 5 promises that the Prime Minister made to the British people. But stop the boats didn't even feature in the Leader of the Opposition's 5 big missions. It's because he probably doesn't care, or is it because he doesn't care, or because he doesn't know what to do? We all know why, and I think the British people know why. It's because deep down, the Leader of the Opposition doesn't want to stop the boats. He thinks it's bigoted to say that we've got too much illegal migration abusing our system. It's because Labour MPs would prefer to write letters stopping the removal of foreign national offenders. It's because the Labour Party would prefer to vote against our measures to penalise foreign national offenders, to streamline our asylum system. Those are the facts, Mr. Speaker. Labour are against deterring people who would come here illegally. They are against detaining people who do come here illegally, and they are against deporting people who are here illegally. That means, Mr. Speaker, that they are for this situation getting worse and worse. Perhaps that's fine. Perhaps that's fine. Perhaps that's fine for the Leader of the Opposition and most of the Labour front bench, but it's not their schools, it's not their GPs, it's not for their public services, housing and hotels filling up with illegal migrants. Perhaps that's why, even before seeing this bill and engaging on the substance, Labour has already said that it wouldn't support its passage through Parliament. Is the Leader of the Opposition committing that the Labour Lords will block it? The British people want to stop the boats. The Conservative government has a plan to stop the boats. This Prime Minister will stop the boats. And if the people want closed minds and open borders, then they can rely on Labour.
Tim Walton. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Never have I heard such fabricated rage against genuine attempts to come up with practical solutions for this problem from a party opposite that has consistently been a policy vacuum on any practical solutions at all. So I support this bill, and particularly the provisions for sustainable, safe and legal routes for genuine asylum seekers. Can I specifically ask the Home Secretary on the Rwanda scheme? When the Home Affairs Select Committee visited Calais recently, we were told that when the Rwanda scheme was announced, there was a big upsurge in migrants in France approaching the authorities, asking about staying in France because there was a deterrent factor. It hasn't happened because the Rwanda scheme has not got off the ground. So when she sees her counterparts in France on Friday, can can we suggest that the French might like to join us in a joint Rwanda-type scheme because they face the same problems? And can they do more? Now, we do have safe and legal routes to stop people getting in the boats, arrest them, and stop this illegal trade at source on their side of the channel.
My right honourable friend is absolutely correct. Deterrence is the key theme running through these measures. We want to send the message loudly and clearly to those people smugglers, to those people thinking about crossing the channel. Do not do it. Do not hand over your life savings. Do not get into that flimsy dinghy. Do not risk your life, because you will not be entitled to a life in the UK.
SNP spokesperson Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the SNP stands proudly behind the Refugee Convention and the European Convention on Human Rights. We believe that all who seek asylum and seek refugee status deserve a fair hearing, and we are 100% behind the clear statement from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees that there is no such thing as an illegal asylum seeker. Mr. Speaker, despite the dreary dog whistle rhetoric, her bill will not so much as lay a solitary finger on people smugglers or people traffickers, but it will cause serious and devastating harm for people who have already endured incredible suffering. Afghans let down by the government's utterly failed relocation schemes will be locked up and offshored. People who have fled persecution in Syria, Eritrea or Iran will remain blocked from the asylum system. The policies that have seen hundreds of children go missing from hotels will be enshrined in her bill. The world-leading modern slavery legislation piloted through by her predecessor is about to be ripped to pieces without a single shred of justification. Mr. Speaker, that is what her appalling bill looks set to deliver, and that is why we will oppose it every step of the way. Mr. Speaker, if every country...
So, very spirited exchanges in the Commons on this introduction of this new law, and interestingly, let's just actually reflect that what we're learning is that it will be a new law, that this actually will be put into effect immediately rather than after, when it's passed through Parliament. The government wants the measures to apply to everyone arriving in the UK by the routes it deems illegal from today. The same approach being used on the Rwanda scheme when that was first created, so immediate effect. However, with Suella Braverman saying this is, unless we act today, the problem will be worse tomorrow. We need reform. That's obvious and urgent. We had then the reply from Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, saying this was Groundhog Day. Today's statement, Groundhog Day, enough is indeed enough, but slogans, not solutions from the government, she said, and indicating that of the 18,000 people who were deemed inadmissible, only 21 were returned because of the lack of return agreements with other countries in Europe. And then Suella Braverman reacting to that by saying this was 5 minutes of hysteria and histrionics, saying that Yvette Cooper should be honest. What she means is open borders by the back door. Well, Ivan is still with us, our lawyer, listening to those exchanges. Just to pick up on a couple of the legal points, Ivan, because obviously this is going to be reliant on the framework and the nuts and bolts. She referred to Rule 39 of Strasbourg being deeply flawed and the modern slavery laws being abused to block removal. Is that what this is really addressing?
Well, what she's done is three things, is that she's saying the new bill will detain and swiftly remove with no bail conditions or judicial review applications to be entertained for 28 days. So she'll have a window of 28 days from engaging with somebody who wants to claim asylum, coming across the channel, to remove them to either their country or safe third country. Now, Yvette Cooper responded by saying, what happens after 28 days?
Do they just get put out on the streets?
Exactly. So I think that they're really counting on getting Rwanda off the planes off the ground, which is why she referred to the Modern Slavery Act, because many Albanians will say they've been trafficked or other, and the Modern Slavery Act, she says, will be disqualified. You'll be disqualified.
That will no longer be a defence, effectively.
Correct,
right,
correct.
Okay.
And then the final point she made was Rule 39, which is Rule 39 is an application, interim application for an injunction, which you can make an application if you say your life's in danger, Article 2 and Article 3. So anyone who says my life's in danger, this state is not protecting it, can go to Strasbourg and get them to give an interim injunction, which is what happened last time the Rwanda plane was stopped. So she's shored that up as well. She's going to stop anyone from making such an application.
So the key still relying on Rwanda getting into action.
Absolutely.
Ivan, thank you for that. It's just got 1 o'clock. You are watching GB News Live. That was the introduction of that new law in the Commons. More reaction coming up in a moment. But first, let's get an update on all the headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 1. The Home Secretary has told MPs in the House of Commons that it would betray British voters not to tackle the waves of illegal migrants breaching our border. Suella Braverman made the comments as she announced details of the new illegal migration bill, which would remove and ban from the UK people who entered illegally. Suella Braverman says the proposed laws will stop illegal migrants exploiting the system. Leaked WhatsApp messages suggest former Health Secretary Matt Hancock considered withholding funding for a learning disability centre to pressure an MP to back new COVID restrictions. The messages obtained by the Daily Telegraph show Mr Hancock and an aide had discussed warning MP James Daly that the centre would be off the table if he rebelled. A spokesperson for Matt Hancock says what is being accused never happened and that the leaked message exchange is only a partial account. The gender pay gap in the UK has widened, with men now paid 14.4% more than women. The accountancy firm PwC's report puts the increase down to a sharp rise in childcare costs, which has priced many women out of work altogether. It's warned at the rate the pay gap is closing, it will now take more than 50 years to reach gender pay parity. MPs are warning that ammunition reserves in the UK and NATO allies have fallen to dangerously low levels as they seek to keep Ukraine supplied. The Commons Defence Committee says rebuilding Britain's stockpile could take at least a decade, putting national security at risk. The committee also says the way in which Western governments procure armaments is not fit for purpose and called for an action plan to restore stockpiles. Parts of northern England and Scotland have been blanketed in snow at the start of a cold spell, with temperatures forecast to drop to -15 in some parts. More than 4 inches of snow have fallen in northern Scotland and around 8 inches are forecast for later this week. Tonight is expected to be the coldest night of the year, with snow warnings remaining in areas until the weekend. Meteorologist John Hammond says it's not unusual weather for this time of year.
A whole reservoir of Arctic air, which has been freezing all through the winter and getting colder and colder and colder. And you only need a northerly wind for that Arctic air to be unleashed across us. And that's what's happening. Of course, it's going to be even more of a shock to the system, given how mild it's been through most of the winter. So some of us haven't seen any snowfall at all. So, yeah, a bit of a shock through March, yeah, because we don't normally associate March with snowfall. But is it that unusual? Not really. In fact, you can get snowfall at Easter some years.
The King and Queen Consort are in Colchester to celebrate its new city status. Colchester was awarded the city title during the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations last year. The couple will visit the city's zoo and castle, as well as Colchester Library, where they'll join charities Age UK and the Silver Line for tea with local volunteers. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Let's digest and reflect on these dramatic revelations on this new illegal migrants bill that we've heard in the Commons in the past half hour. Home Secretary Suella Braverman making that statement on the measures aimed to curb illegal migration, saying the plan to prevent migrants from using small boats to reach the UK, pushing the boundaries of international law. She'd acknowledged that earlier, but insisting that action was needed because the asylum system was being overwhelmed, she said, and it would betray British British voters not to tackle the waves, as she described them, of illegal migrants breaching our borders, going on to say, unless we act today, the problem will be worse tomorrow. The need for reform is obvious and urgent. However, Yvette Cooper, then the Shadow Home Secretary, indicating this statement today is Groundhog Day, going on to say of 18,000 previous migrants who had been deemed inadmissible, only 21 were actually returned because no return agreements with the countries they'd come from, and indicating, she said, that we needed properly controlled legal routes. Well, let's get more with Mark White joining us now from outside the Home Office, because, Mark, the other interesting thing is that this actually comes into play straight away. They're not waiting for the law to actually be passed by Parliament. They're pressing the button on this straight away.
Yeah, it's going to be retrospective. So from today, anyone that crosses into the UK via an irregular route, so on a small boat, in the back of a lorry, or whichever way they decide to illegally enter the UK, then they will fall into this category. It was quite a powerful speech by the Home Secretary, and she said that effectively it will mean that anybody over the age of 18 will automatically lose their right to claim asylum. All those people will, as soon as practically be possible, be removed from the UK unless they are physically unfit to fly, or there is an extreme concern that they could fall into some kind of harm wherever they are sent to. Of course, it's all going to depend as well on these return agreements, Mark, return agreements with countries of origin for those coming across, or third-party countries. So that's where Rwanda falls into place. Extremely important that Rwanda and other like-minded countries that want to enter into an agreement with the UK come forward. But of course, Rwanda, as we know, is being played out in the courts as we speak. If another country comes forward and wants to sign up to a similar scheme, it may well be subject of the same kind of legal challenges as well. But Suella Braverman, very clear. She said that the British people were very fair and very patient, but their patience has been tried by 45,000 plus people who have come over and, in her estimate, have abused the asylum system. That's why she wants to introduce the legislation. She spoke of 100 million people who could be eligible to claim asylum in this country. That is just not sustainable going forward. She wants to introduce a cap once the backlog has been cleared, a cap that would set out how many people the UK government is prepared to accept as refugees each year, and go forward from that point.
And Suella Braverman accusing Labour of wanting open borders by the back door. But of course, Yvette Cooper making some interesting points. Talking of slogans, not solutions, she said, i.e. that Rwanda could actually only take a few hundred. So that would not be a solution. And then the question mark, what happens after the 28 days in detention to these people while they're waiting for the things to be processed? Do they just take to the streets? What happens to them?
Yeah, well, that first point is a complete red herring by Yvette Cooper. This was never a policy that would only ever amount to a few hundred people going to Rwanda. The few hundred people mark was the first tranche of individuals who would be sent to Rwanda in accommodation that had been purpose-built for them. Other accommodation has been prepared and is being prepared as we speak. The plan was always to send thousands of people to Rwanda over the months and years ahead once this system is fully up and running. So all of this that we constantly hear time and time again, that they are only taking a couple of hundred, is just a nonsense. The other issue about people being on the street and being in limbo, there is some element of truth to that. What are they going to do with those who are no longer in an asylum system as such? They're not being considered for asylum. They are actually in a process of removal. Do you put them in hotel accommodation while they await that removal process to be complete? the chances are they may run off if they feel that, well, there is no chance now of asylum, I'm going to be removed in a month or two's time. That does happen to a degree anyway. It may happen even more significantly. So the other issue is, what do we do with them? Are they then put into effectively detention centres? And these detention centres would have to be capable of housing many thousands of people for months at a time before they are removed. So yes, certainly some unanswered questions on that part, but this Rwanda issue, as I say, it was never meant to be just a couple of hundred people, 200 or 300 people. They are planning to take thousands, Mark.
Mark, thank you for that at the Home Office. But let's bring in Ivan Sampson, immigration lawyer, still with us here in the studio. And Ivan, you were making the observation that what has been set out is actually that the key element is getting the Rwanda, this corridor, if you like, moving, because you need this safe passage to a third party to get everything else unstuck effectively.
Indeed. The majority of people coming across the channel have no identity documents or they dispose of it. So we don't know where they come from, and really making assessments of people's origins is fraught with difficulty, and the Home Office have experienced that. Even assessing their age has been difficult. So the government needs a safe third country, that being Rwanda, but it begs the question that if the refugees coming across, or the boat people coming across the channel don't lessen, and it maintains the levels that we've been getting, or even increases.
3,000 so far in these first 2 months.
How many can Rwanda take? And then how many hotels need to be built in Rwanda? I mean, that's a practical problem that the government have to...
And as Mark has reflected, the legal challenges to Rwanda are still going on. If that doesn't become resolved, what happens to the rest of this superstructure? Presumably, it all falls down.
Well, I think Rishi Sunak's in danger because his whole political reputation rests on this policy. As I said when we started this programme, if they don't get Rwanda off the ground, then this illegal immigration bill won't get off the ground either.
Right. Now, let's turn to the other assessment, and that is where we now stand in terms of our international standing and international law. You were reflecting earlier on what the Home Secretary said about modern slavery laws. Rule 39 in Strasbourg, she said, deeply flawed, and basically disqualifying people from the modern slavery laws, i.e. Albanian migrants coming across, economic migrants, because, of course, they're coming effectively from a safe country.
Indeed. The modern slavery laws, what happens is that once you claim that you've been trafficked, the national referral mechanism kicks in. So the police are involved, there's various interviews. That takes time, 12 months, probably 2 years. So that prevents removal of individuals while that's being considered.
Right. Home Secretary still on her feet, answering questions. As an immigration lawyer, I'm going to pose a very bare question to you. Is this going to work?
We don't know. I think it could work if Rwanda gets off the ground. If they start removing people to Rwanda, I would think if I was an asylum seeker, not a genuine one, but even if I was coming across a channel and I was going to end up in Rwanda, would I want to pay thousands of pounds to a trafficker to do that? So it really depends on people, the system, actually doing what it says. And that's the difficulty, because I don't think it will. I don't think the Rwanda policy will succeed, and I don't believe that this immigration bill will succeed.
Labour were making the point once more, Yvette Cooper, that basically what needed to be looked at, and she reflected the conviction of the people smugglers effectively collapsed. And that was the area, really, that Labour previously said, you know, we need to get the criminal investigations into what these gangs are doing.
Indeed, and that's a good point she made. She also made the point about bilateral agreements, firstly with France.
Yeah.
I mean,
18,000 were deemed inadmissible. Only 21 were returned in terms of return agreements.
I hate to talk about Brexit, but lots of problems we have is because we came out of the European Union.
So those channels aren't there.
We're no longer in the Dublin Convention. We can't return people to France. We need something akin to Dublin Convention, an agreement with France to send people back. And I mean,
do you believe that will be the second part of this, maybe, because we've got Rishi Sunak going to meet Macron on Friday?
I hope so, because really, people are dying coming across the channel, and we need to stop this unsustainable flow of people. And I think everyone agrees on that.
Yeah. OK, Ivan, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your expert opinion. And, of course, we shall see, with, as we say, those measures in place now as we speak. They won't be waiting for a parliamentary approval, and it's retrospective. Home Secretary still on her feet. We'll reflect on what else she's saying. But let's bring in now Kim Rye, one of our viewers, joining us, a resident in Lydd in Kent. And, of course, the Kent coastline there, Kim, is the front line, as many would see it, in terms of the boats coming across. I know there's lots of technical stuff in what was said there, but what did you take of the main message from the Home Secretary?
Well, the main message I'm getting is none of these people are rooted in reality. For a start, they're working on the ONS figures of the migrants crossing the Channel. We know that's not accurate. We have them coming in all the time, on the beach, no RNLI, just on the beach, disappear into the countryside and vanish, get into waiting cars, stand at bus stops. You know, the ONS figures, for a start, that needs to be looked at again, because it's not a true record. These people have never witnessed...
You're talking about the Office for National Statistics, the official figures?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all like, it's like the pandemic, all skewed, just skewed. But let's look at the business model here, right? We've got a business model of a huge syndicate of criminals. These are being assisted, and I'm going to say this, and this isn't allegedly, I've seen this with my own eyes, by the refugee charities. Care for Calais is currently under investigation by the Charities Commission. You can check that on the Charities Commission website. They're telling them how to cross, where to cross, what to say when they land. When they land on this side, they're being given parcels. What needs to be smashed is the business model from the top down. And also, these dinghies, where are they being made? Where are they being stored? They need to be destroyed.
Yeah. Let's just reflect. Care for Calais aren't here to actually put their side of that and to defend themselves. What we do know, because Mark White, our correspondent, has been following the trail of the boats which are manufactured and then used, as you say, by these criminal gangs. Do you actually accept Labour's point that maybe there should be more impetus or effort put into actually getting the people smugglers convicted and collapsing that business model?
Absolutely, and I'm no supporter of Labour, and now I'm no supporter of the Conservatives either. None of them are fit for purpose, but with that point, I completely agree. They need to get the business model, stop that. These people need to be locked up for life, because, yes, there are lives at risk here, not just the lives of migrants, but the people rescuing them. Yeah. And I've seen I've seen and filmed many of these landings, and I can tell you, the security of the local people and the people of this country is being put in jeopardy just by allowing this to happen.
This would be the beaches, Dungeness and Winchelsea and those other areas of Kent and East Sussex?
Yes. Dungeness and Pett Level are the two most popular landing spots after Dover. There's something like 440 miles of Kent and Sussex coastline. A lot of it is remote. So they can just land unseen and just disappear. And now what they do is they separate into small groups or pairs or threes so that they're not as obvious and conspicuous to people living here. But we see them all the time, standing at the bus stop, getting into a taxi, well, a waiting car, for want of a better word. We see it all the time. You see, what these people in Parliament aren't doing is asking the people here what we see.
Well, we've certainly got your voice on anyway. And as we say, Care for Calais aren't here to actually defend themselves in terms of your allegation. But Kim, thank you for that in Lydd in Kent. But let's now bring in the voice from France. Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, who's a French journalist and columnist, joins us now. Anne-Elisabeth, thank you for your time. As we've been discussing, we've got Rishi Sunak heading to meet President Macron on Friday. What do you believe the President will make of what's been announced in the Commons and in terms of trying to stop this flow across the Channel?
I think the French are not especially in favour of the flow of migrants, but they think that they're going to have a more a sort of reasonable partner, not somebody who's trying to make a sort of public relations with the case, but examining what is possible between France and Britain to work a solution out.
And is there sympathy, particularly in Calais and Sangatte and elsewhere, in terms of tackling, as we've heard from Labour in the Commons there, that the business model, if you like, and the people smugglers who are actually enabling the boats to set sail from the beaches?
I think everybody agrees on this one, and you know they arrive at Calais because they've already crossed Europe, mostly coming in through Greece and through Italy because of people smugglers. You know that you've got those tiny rafts which are absolutely not seaworthy, which are put to sea by people smugglers because they fully expect the NGOs and the national navies to pick them up because that is the law of the sea. You do not let people to go and drown, and then they come to France. The only attitude of the French, which may not be solved in the summit on Friday, is the French say, well, why do all these migrants go to Britain? Because they get far more benefits than they do in Britain than they do in France.
Yeah, and that question asked, of course, in the House of Commons, that why is it that these people are not claiming asylum in France, which is a safe haven country, of course, as they travel through?
It's a very perfectly valid question. There are two main reasons why they would rather go to Britain. One is that they speak English, that many of them have got relatives or at least communities that themselves speak English. The nationality of the migrants, depending on country, has a relation to the past and the colonial past of each country. Yeah. And so in France, we've got French speakers, and in Britain, you've got people from the Indian subcontinent who speak English when they speak a foreign language. And of course, it's easier for them to adapt. And the other one, of course, is that in Britain, the conditions in which people can settle and just sort of sleep are incredibly better. The French have no real problems in having those places like the jungle in Calais or those places at La Chapelle in Paris where you've got those sad tent villages of migrants. In Britain, they are put, and that honours Britain, but they are put in much better conditions.
So you don't have these hotels and the B&Bs and so on in France being provided for those people who are trying to find safe haven?
The people who get them have got to be registered in one way or another. And that's a huge difference between France and Britain.
Yeah. Very quickly then, Anne-Elizabeth, while you're on there from Paris, we get these stories coming through now about the latest strikes and the fact that that's affecting cross-channel traffic, not the small boats, but the ferries and so on. Has Macron got a lot on his plate at the moment?
He's got a great deal on his plate. The strike about the pensions is something that, in a sense, is the French sort of coming out in the street, as we like to do, to say that conditions are becoming very difficult. The cost of living is going up. Cost of living is going up, where the economic situation is not very good. So it's not just the fact that people are worried about what they're going to be like when they are pensioners and they get, in any case, less money to live on. It's also that life is becoming more difficult now. So Macron has got a lot on his plate.
With a grève, indeed. Elizabeth, thank you very much indeed for updating us there in Paris. And we'll see, of course, what happens on Friday. Thank you very much indeed. So, strikes in France, strikes here, of course, with the health unions. However, it appears the government might be entering negotiations with those health unions on the pay disputes. We'll be finding out what's going on behind closed doors. That's coming up shortly.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, we've been concentrating, of course, in the House of Commons with that issue of the new law on migration. But a little earlier, during health and social care questions, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, struck a conciliatory tone about the ongoing negotiations with NHS staff. Labour calling on him to apologise for all the cancelled appointments during strikes. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting telling the Commons when nurses and paramedics voted to take strike action, the Secretary of State refused to negotiate and said the pay review body's decision was final. However, Steve Barclay coming back to say what he omitted to remind the House was that at the time the demand from the trade unions was for a 19% consolidated pay rise, which is very different to the basis on which talks have been entered. That 19%, of course, figure from the nurses' union indications perhaps that things are moving towards an agreement. Let's get more with our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, outside the Department of Health and Social Care. And Tom, we're finding difficulty finding out what the discussions are about, which itself indicates they may well be of substance.
We are. We know one point of agreement in these negotiations, and that's that both the unions, led by Unison, the largest union taking part, their head of health is sort of directing the overarching strategy. They and the government have both agreed to not give a running commentary on what is happening within these discussions. And that leads to one big thing, because of course we've heard from previous discussions between unions and government, or unions and employers, we've heard sort of drips and drabs and leaks and briefing and counter-briefing. They're keeping very tight lips about these negotiations today, which suggests that there may well be more progress being made behind closed doors. And why might there be more progress being made? Well, there have been considerable movement on both sides. Of course, those strikes that were going to take place on Wednesday have been temporarily called off, and indeed we've been hearing from many of the unions that their pay demands have been being brought down into the single-figure range rather than that double-digit range. But also, crucially, Number 10 and the wider government has opened the door to speaking not just about the 2023-24 pay year, but also potentially backdated pay, looking at 2022-23 and that financial year. And that's a very, very key bit of movement from the government, because up until this point, up until the weekend, the government had not said that it would be willing to discuss backdated pay.
And, of course, that's the issue with the Fire Brigades Union as well. They're I think, original 7% backdated to last year, another 5% this year. Is this because the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has found this 30 billion or even 56 billion, some suggest, down the back of the sofa that he won't have to borrow because of the extra tax take that there's been in the economy?
Yes, Number 10 was pouring cool water on this news story when it broke just a couple of weeks ago, but it is true to say that the tax receipts this country has received, that HMRC is enjoying, are far higher than were expected in the forecasts by the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility. But not just the tax receipts being higher, also expenditure is lower in key certain areas, particularly around the energy price guarantee guarantee. The global price of energy has fallen to a level lower than was expected by the government, and so the level at which the taxpayer is subsidising energy bills is coming in cheaper than expected as well. The third strand of all of this is actually an error made by the Office for Budget Responsibility as well around the cost of quantitative easing. It's a very complex calculation, but one that the OBR seem to have got wrong. Those three things added together mean that £30 billion underspend, or rather extra cash than otherwise would have been expected, is available to the government. However, the Chancellor would be the first to say that that doesn't mean the government's in surplus. They are still borrowing money, they're just borrowing less than they thought they would be.
Tom, thank you for taking us through there. And, of course, as soon as we hear any more at the Department of Health, perhaps in a breakthrough, we'll be back to you. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up here on GB News Live, the latest from the trial and the murder trial of that little girl, Olivia Pratt-Corbell, of course, the 9-year-old who was shot inside her home in Liverpool last year. That's coming up in a moment. First, latest headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you. It's 1:31. Here are the headlines. The Home Secretary's told MPs in the House of Commons that it would betray British voters not to tackle the waves of illegal migrants breaching our border. Suella Braverman made the comment as she announced details of the new illegal migration bill, which would remove and ban from the UK people who enter illegally.
The bill enables detention of illegal arrivals without bail or judicial review within the first 28 days of detention until they can be removed. It puts a duty on the Home Secretary to remove illegal entrants and will radically narrow the number of challenges and appeals that can suspend removal. Only those under 18, medically unfit to fly, or at a real risk of serious and irreversible harm, an exceedingly high bar in the country we are removing them to, will be able to delay their removal. Any other claims will be heard remotely after removal.
Leaked WhatsApp messages suggest former Health Secretary Matt Hancock considered withholding funding for a learning disability centre to pressure an MP to back new COVID restrictions. The messages obtained by the Daily Telegraph show Mr Hancock and an aide had discussed warning MP James Daly that the centre would be off the table if he rebelled. A spokesperson for Mr Hancock says what is being accused never happened. The gender pay gap in the UK has widened, with men now paid 14.4% more than women. The accountancy firm PwC's report puts the increase down to a sharp rise in childcare costs, which has priced many women out of work altogether. It's warned at the rate the pay gap is closing, it will now take more than 50 years to reach gender pay parity. The King and Queen Consort are in Colchester to celebrate its new city status. The couple will visit the city's zoo and castle, as well as Colchester Library, where they'll join charities Age UK and the Silver Line for tea, also with local volunteers. Colchester was awarded the city title during the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations last year. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, let's update you with a court case in Liverpool. It's concerning the man accused of murdering Olivia Pratt-Corbell, the little 9-year-old in Liverpool, being told that the man was in ruthless pursuit of his intended target when he shot the 9-year-old in her own home. Thomas Cashman, who's 34, West Derby, Liverpool, appearing at Manchester Crown Court after being charged with the murder of Olivia, who was shot inside her home in Liverpool in August last year. Well, Cashman also charged with 2 counts of attempted murder and 2 counts of possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life. Let's get latest outside the court now with our North West reporter, Sophie Reaper, who's been following all the evidence and obviously upsetting details for the jury to go through, Sophie.
Very upsetting, and there's been quite a lot as well. I'll just run you through a few of them, Mark. This morning, prosecutor David McLaughlin began the opening statements. He told the jury that the man in the dock, Thomas Cashman, had lay in wait for Joseph Nee, who was without any doubt the intended target of the attack. Mr. Cashman, of course, denies all of the charges that he faces. Now, Mr. McLaughlin works through the chronology, assisted by various CCTV of that day leading up to the incident. One of those included, we saw Mr. Cashman approach an address where he believed Mr. Nee to be. We saw on CCTV, he approached, he looked up, and then he made a complete U-turn. Now, the prosecution said to the jury it's up to them to make up their minds, but that they allege that Mr. Cashman was on his way to shoot Joseph Nee then and there, but was thwarted because Joseph Nee was no longer at the property. Now, we then moved on to later that night, and the jury were told that Mr. Cashman then did know where Mr. Nee was and that it was then game on. We heard more details about the shooting, including how Olivia had come downstairs after hearing the gunshots because she was scared, and after she'd received the wound that would prove fatal, her mother said to her, "Stay with me, baby." Finally, after the shooting, the prosecution told the court that Mr. Cashman allegedly fled using people's back gardens. He arrived at the house of someone whom he knew and trusted, but a month later that person would give a witness statement to the police. They told the police that Cashman had said he'd been told by someone else that Joseph Nee and some others had been watching him and that he wanted to get them before they got him. They also said of Cashman that he's jeopardised everyone else's life just to save his own back. Now, court is due to resume this afternoon and we'll be bringing you all the latest updates as we get them.
Yeah. Now, Cashman, of course, denies all the charges. What about Olivia's family? Are they there following the evidence and actually retracing this awful day?
Well, they've been here since the very beginning when Thomas Cashman was first charged back in October of last year. They've been there the whole time and they are here. They were here yesterday and we've seen them here again today. Both Olivia's mother and father are here at Manchester Crown Court today.
OK, Sophie, thank you for that. Back to you, of course, as we hear more evidence this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. Now, the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, has announced that Labour would carry out a review of the business tax regime, focused on providing certainty and boosting investment, she said, as part of driving forward the party's mission to secure the highest sustained growth in the G7. Of course, that's what Keir Starmer had said last week. Well, joining us now from the Kiwi 2 Centre in central London, our political reporter, Catherine Forster. So, more detail being put on this plan, Catherine?
Yes, a little bit, but as always, you hear a lot of words, and the devil will be in the detail, and the detail is still not terribly clear. But Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, speaking today to the manufacturing conference, talking about the importance of increasing manufacturing here in the UK, that can be a vital part of building this growth that Labour have pledged to get the highest growth in the G7, haven't they? She said they want to buy, make and sell more in Britain, talked about the manufacturing possibilities all around the country and how that needs to be incentivised. Now, they are launching a review of the business rate regime. She was talking about corporation tax. Labour are agreeing with the government, who, of course, are going to be putting up corporation tax next week. But she was saying that was really less important than the fact that the businesses needed, she said, certainty, consistency and incentives. She said that they needed to prioritise incentives, and that corporation tax had yo-yoed up and down with certain add-ons. And she said there'd been 22 changes to the corporation tax regime over the last 3 years, which is deeply unhelpful to business. She really had a go at the Conservative record, saying that as things currently stand, the average UK household stands to be poorer than the average household in Poland by 2030. Now, also, I got a chance to ask her about the topic of the day, which, of course, is the small boats crisis in the Channel. Let's have a look at what she had to say. Will Labour support the government on its plans to stop illegal migration? And if not, what would you be doing differently?
But it is absolutely crucial that we do reduce the small boats crossing the Channel. It is incredibly dangerous and people are losing their lives. And it is not right that people cross here illegally who are coming from safe countries. Labour have already set out the things that we would do, like cracking down on illegal gangs and working in partnership with France, for example, to ensure that people can be returned home and that we reduce the number of crossings. But if you look at the government's track record, just 2% of asylum claims from small boats last year have been processed. That is not good enough, and it is meaning that it is taking too long to return people if they have no right to be here, and means that the support cannot be given to those people who are genuine asylum seekers. But we all know, and we do share the objective, that we need to reduce the number of boats crossing the Channel.
So the Labour leader there really attacking the government's record on the small boat crossings, which of course have rocketed to over 45,000 in the last few years, especially saying that the fact that only 2% of people arriving in the last year are processed within a year, which really is costing us an awful lot of money. However, on being asked specifically whether she would support the government's plans, she didn't answer. She simply said that they hadn't seen the plans in detail yet. But clearly, this is an issue that many voters feel incredibly strongly about. So it will be interesting to see how this legislation fares as it makes its way through the Houses of Parliament.
Yes, so with Rachel Reeves, Shadow Chancellor, of course, with that speech at the QE2. Catherine, thank you very much indeed for updating us on that. But let's stay with politics now. Plenty of it today. Downing Street refusing to be drawn when it will stage the Commons vote on the deal with the EU on post-Brexit trading arrangements in Northern Ireland, the so-called Windsor Framework. Well, the DUP is setting up an 8-member consultative panel to examine that framework before deciding on whether to re-enter power sharing at Stormont. Will contain former party leaders, including Baroness Foster and Peter Robinson as well. Let's get more from Belfast now with our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie. And Doogie, of course, they did say they were going to take their time on this. I mean, are we still talking days or weeks ahead?
Well, Jeffrey Donaldson said exactly he would take his time, and he's more or less aiming at the end of March, start of April. Of course, he will be in Washington next week for the St. Patrick's Day celebrations and may come under a lot of pressure there. And of course, he can then say, sorry, we're examining this deal. We're going through it piece by piece. And to be in his shoes, I could see exactly why he is examining it. There is very, very shaded areas in this. If I took 10 cows to Carlisle to sell them and then only sold 8, the 2 coming back, would they be in the red lanes or would they be in the green lanes? Well, the EU are saying red lanes. British Parliament is saying, no, green lanes. If we had a foot and mouth outbreak in some, say, Monaghan or Keady or somewhere on the border, would we be part of the EU or would we be part of the UK? And if we're in the EU, can our companies here bid for contracts inside the EU without having to set up a business in the EU or partner up with an EU business? And all those things need to be looked at very, very closely, because of course it affects us all in Northern Ireland. Not all farmers are nationalists, not all manufacturers are unionists. So of course those questions have to be asked, and Sir Geoffrey Donaldson very much saying we need clarification on them before we go back in here, and of course that starts to lock us down once more and he ends up with no stability here. So the good point about this is the DUP actually seem to be trying to work this as a framework as opposed to an agreement, an end-all agreement.
OK, so that's the mechanics, if you like, of that cross-border, as you say, the channels, red or green, and which colour you paint your cows. But what about the other issue, the political issue, that Stormont break? Is that actually exercising their minds as well?
Well, it does seem to be, but at this moment in time, they are very much concentrating on the business side of this first.
Right.
They're looking to see exactly where we stand financially. Because don't forget, Northern Ireland, 70% of Northern Ireland's trade is with the UK, not with the EU. And I am quite literally amazed that the DUP are doing this in such detail. This is the first time I think any of us in Northern Ireland have seen the DUP go very openly into a deal. Not kick it out, not the horses haven't bolted, and they're deciding to have a look at what's there. I think this is a good move for Northern Ireland politics at this minute in time.
Yes, because as you say, it's got to be workable, even if they agree to it. So for the moment, Dougie, thank you for that. I suspect we'll be back to you in the coming days and weeks. But for the moment, Stormont, thanks for updating us. Now, let's just update you on the GBViews inbox, because there's plenty of reaction to what we were hearing with this announcement by Suella Braverman. Don't forget, you can get in touch with us, gbviews@gbnews.uk. First of all, Paul from Knaresborough on the migrant proposal. It's a simple answer. Don't make them welcome. If they live in tents in France, give them a tent here, not a hotel, and let the do-gooders pay their costs. Andrew, he's not in favour of the bill, saying the UK's paid £140 million to Rwanda so far, with 0 people sent there, plus repeated annual payments to follow. In 2020, the cost per person to be removed to Rwanda was more than £13,000 each. Braverman stoked the fire by suggesting that only law-abiding patriotic people want this farce. Another view then from Paul, who says Labour and SNP never offer a solution to how we can house illegal migrants and ignore the question of why they throw away their ID papers. So keep your views coming. We'll try and reflect as many. And, of course, keep your pictures coming if you're being hit by the snow at the moment, because people in the northeast, particularly of England and Scotland, waking up to snow with a cold snap beginning to hit the UK, and the yellow weather warnings for southern England and Wales being issued now by the Met Office, updated to Wednesday 12 a.m. to Thursday 9 a.m. Expected there could be between 1 to 3 centimetres of snow in wide areas, but local areas could see falls of between 5 to 10 centimetres. We were warned, however, by John Ketley, former BBC weatherman, who is still there at his screens keeping us updated, because, John, you were indicating that, a bit worse could be on the way, and it's heading even, further west and south, I think.
It's on the way, certainly. I'm keeping the goalposts in exactly the same place as they were yesterday, but the only penalty kick is that the northern half of Scotland will hang on to the severely wintry weather for at least another 8 days. Elsewhere, a little bit greyer. There will be some snow for many, but eventually it will turn to rain across more southern parts, and then we're going to get some stronger winds coming in through the English Channel. That may have repercussions for some, but a lot of rain to come in the south eventually after the snow does arrive in the next 24 hours. So just to put the details onto that, Mark, well, it's pretty raw down in the south of England this morning, and it's still very much the same as well. Still some sleet around, temperatures 3 degrees in central London, and more sleety snow to come tonight and through tomorrow at times as well. It's very light, not really going to amount to a great deal, except up on the higher ground of Bodmin, Dartmoor, down across Salisbury Plain, places like that during Wednesday. Whereas further north, it's this very, very cold night we've got in store. The coldest night of the year so far, no doubt. -12, -15 up in the Grampians, and typically -4 to -6 degrees elsewhere in country areas across the rest of the UK, but not in the south where we hang on to the cloud. Now, this sleet and snow eventually will start to move northwards on Wednesday night into Thursday, and that's when we're going to start to see some real disruptive problems across the North Midlands, North Wales, and up into Northern England initially, and then moving on then into southern and central Scotland and Northern Ireland. So as you can tell from what I'm saying, Mark, we're not out of the woods by a long way. We're keeping the playing field pretty level at the moment, but I think whatever you're doing, you need to take care and, just stay heated and listen to the forecasts.
OK, we're getting some pictures in which do, they look rather pretty, but as you say, indications that this could be, problems for about 8 days for some, because obviously, I guess, the temperatures means it's going to hang around. But in terms of the snowfall we're looking at later in the week, is it going to be a quick dump or is it prolonged snow? And is that why you're all worried about what's coming in store for us?
Yes, I think it's the longevity of it up in some central and northern parts of the UK where there's going to be a real issue, I think. Certainly Thursday, Friday and into Saturday in places too. So you're really looking across that central zone, Northern Ireland, across to Northern England and central and southern Scotland. That area will bear the brunt of the longevity of the heavy snowfall that's coming during the week. Further south, there will be some snowfall, may not amount to more than 2 or 3 centimetres on some of the lower ground, a bit more, of course, up on the higher ground of South Wales and the high ground of the Midlands too. We mustn't forget that some of the Midlands is actually pretty high. It's over 1,000 feet, and there will be some considerable snowfall there before it turns back to rain during Thursday. So wherever you are, I think many places are going to see some snow this week. And eventually, as I say, it will turn very much milder across more southern counties, and then we'll start to see the winds increasing and some pretty steady and quite heavy rain across more of the south later in the week.
OK, as that temperature increases. But what about the wind then when the snow falls? Because, of course, that causes the drifting problems as well.
Yeah, well, there will be quite a strong wind coming in from the east across northern areas where you've got the heavy snowfall coming down. And that will be an issue across, the high ground, particularly of northern England. You can just imagine the news now. I think we might as well do the news right away, Mark. You can see that lots of people are going to be stranded at places like Tan Hill up in the North Pennines. Let's hope that not too many people are stranded in cars and coaches.
Indeed. But, of course, it's as soon as the snow starts falling on London, that's when it becomes a story, of course, for all the papers, when they suddenly wake up to what's happening. But anyway, we can't say we weren't warned. Thank you for your detailed assessment. I suspect we might be back to you in the next day or two. But for the moment, John, thank you very much indeed. And, of course, we'll have our own weather forecast as well, just to keep you abreast. But let's reflect now on, a bit of a problem for Japan with its H3 rocket, which self-destructed after liftoff. This was the second stage engine failing to ignite just minutes after it left the ground. Pictures coming up for you in a moment. The first medium-lift rocket that's been designed by Japan in some 30 years. And the experts was waiting for takeoff. Here we go. Basically saying that it was not able to achieve orbit after that second stage motor failed to ignite. And, of course, the irony being that Japan has complained about North Korea sending various rockets and missiles over its territory and them falling back to Earth. Well, certainly this is one that they had to press the button to make sure that all was safe after the engine failed. But they do say they will try and get it back up into the air with, I think, state, private individuals and companies and universities all involved in this joint project. But some disappointment there for the Japanese. Let's bring in Andy Lound, our space expert, joining us once more. Andy, thanks for your time. Surprising, given, how good the Japanese are at technology?
It's an interesting one, this, because, of course, this is the second failure of this rocket. This rocket is a decade in the development. Loads of delays with the development of designing these liquid-fueled engines, and it is a bit of a blow to Japan. It is a surprise in some respects, but one of the reasons why Japan probably has an issue with this is because they're going on this purely internally. They're not allowing external bodies to come in and be involved with the development of it. And one of the reasons for this is China on the doorstep. There's a strategic issue going on here that Japan want an independent launch facility, independent of everybody else. That's quite important. Plus, of course, they want to get involved as well in the commercial market. The SpaceX has been such a successful project that companies are simply going to them now to launch their satellites into space, and they really do need to get into this market. The war in Ukraine has meant that companies are not going to Russia to launch satellites, and that was a big money spinner for Russia because they paid for those launches in US dollars. So that was a big income for Russia, and they've now lost that. So there's a big race now to get into this commercial market. So for this alone, Japan need these rockets to be successful, and it is a bit of blow. The first rocket was a failure of electrical systems on the first stage. In this particular case, the second stage failed to ignite. So it's got an indication that there's an electrical system issue going on here, but of course we can't be certain. But it is a big blow to Japan.
So, and is the technology the same as SpaceX and all the other vehicles that we see going up? Because I think this had an optical satellite on board, Eros 3 or something of that nature. So the same sort of payload, if you like, that everyone else is trying to get up into space.
Payloads are more or less the same, yes. I mean, as a private company, I mean, if GB News wanted to launch their own satellite, for instance, you could actually go to any one of these companies to actually launch it for you. So that would be fine. I mean, this can lift up to 4 tons with extra boosters on it. So it's quite a serious piece of kit. And this was going to go into geostationary orbit, so well over 400 miles into space. So what they actually launch is the same as everybody else. It's the tech that's underneath the system itself, which is slightly different because this is a homegrown tech. And Japan have always done it very differently to the West. They've always had private industry directly involved with JAXA, their space agency, to develop these technologies. And there could be a situation here of too many cooks, maybe. Who knows? But it is an interesting one. You'd expect Japan to be on the ball with all this. But they've had failures before with some of their other solid fueled rockets and things like that. It's certainly not the world lead. I mean, things like SpaceX at the moment are probably the world leaders in those doing this kind of technology.
OK, and how long will it take them to get back in the air and try once more, do we think?
They'll be wanting to do this very quickly indeed. The Japanese will move fast because they can't afford to slip behind. Because if there's a reliability issue you have on your launch facility, then you're just going to lose customers straight away. So they've got to get a successful launch. It's now absolutely critical. They're going to do this in probably within a couple of months to get another one up. They've really got to try and do this now.
Andy, thank you very much indeed. And, of course, we'll await to see if they can get that going again with perhaps a tinkering with the electrical system, as you say. Thank you very much. Now, let's just update you. We were reporting earlier that Thomas Cashman, 34, West Derby in Liverpool, had appeared at Manchester Crown Court today, charged with that murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. You remember she was shot inside her home in Liverpool in August 22nd of last year. Also charged with attempted murder and wounding with intent to inflict grievous bodily harm and 2 counts of possession of a firearm to endanger life. So those are the charges, and that case is continuing. We'll be back there at Manchester Crown Court to get an update with Sophie Reaper and all the evidence that's being provided to the court as we speak. But let's remind you, with GB News Live, don't head away for the moment, because we've got the latest reaction on the migrant policy, whether it'll work or not. And, of course, we've got the King and the Queen Consort with the latest public appearance as that coronation heads ever nearer. More on that coming up shortly.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you in this hour. A short while ago, Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, announcing her toughest measures yet to prevent and deter the small boat channel crossings. Charities saying that the policy will break the UK's commitment to the UN Refugee Convention. The Home Secretary says she's confident it's compatible with international law. Who's right? The row rages on with Labour's appointment of Sue Gray. Questions now between the two main parties over when she was approached to work for Sir Keir Starmer. Reaction coming up to that. And it's that time of year again. Eurovision tickets on sale at noon, but the huge numbers meant that the Ticketmaster site crashed under the huge demand, and they sold out after half an hour. But do they all realise how much the hotels in Liverpool will be charging you if you're going to attend Eurovision? And as ever, get your views across to us with all the views of the day. And indeed, your weather pictures. Many places being hit by snow. More on the way. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Latest headlines now coming up with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you, and good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 2 minutes past 2. The Home Secretary has told MPs in the House of Commons that it would betray British voters not to tackle the waves of illegal migrants breaching our border. Suella Braverman made the comment as she announced details of the new illegal migration bill, which would remove and ban from the UK people who enter illegally.
This bill enables detention of illegal arrivals without bail or judicial review within the first 28 days of detention until they can be removed. It puts a duty on the Home Secretary to remove illegal entrants and will radically narrow the number of challenges and appeals that can suspend removal. Only those under 18, medically unfit to fly, or at a real risk of serious and irreversible harm, an exceedingly high bar in the country we are removing them to, will be able to delay their removal. Any other claims will be heard remotely after removal.
Well, Stuart MacDonald from the Scottish National Party says that no asylum seekers are illegal.
We believe that all who seek asylum and seek refugee status deserve a fair hearing, and we are 100% behind the clear statement from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees that there is no such thing as an illegal asylum seeker. Mr. Speaker, despite the dreary dog whistle rhetoric, her bill will not so much as lay a solitary finger on people smugglers or people traffickers, but it will cause serious and devastating harm for people who have already endured incredible suffering.
Leaked WhatsApp messages suggest former Health Secretary Matt Hancock considered withholding funding for a learning disability centre to pressure an MP to back new COVID restrictions. The messages obtained by the Daily Telegraph show Mr Hancock and an aide had discussed warning MP James Daly that the centre would be off the table if he rebelled. A spokesperson for Matt Hancock says what is being accused never happened and that the leaked message exchange is only a partial account of the conversation. The trial of the man accused of murdering Olivia Pratt-Corbell has heard that she was shot after running downstairs, screaming to her mother that she was scared. 9-year-old Olivia died after a gunman fired into her home in Liverpool last August. Manchester Crown Court has been told that the suspect, Thomas Cashman, had been lying in wait for his intended target on the evening of the shooting. He denies murder. The gender pay gap in the UK has widened, with men now paid 14.4% more than women. The accountancy firm PwC's report puts the increase down to a sharp rise in childcare costs, which has priced many women out of work altogether. It's warned at the rate the pay gap is closing, it will now take more than 50 years to reach gender pay parity. Thousands of UK travellers have been hit by disruption caused by a general strike in France. Dozens of flights and trains were cancelled and ferries were delayed due to French workers walking out in protest at Emmanuel Macron's plan to raise the pension age from 62 to 64. Cancer Research UK estimates around 75,000 GP appointments will be freed up every month if people stop smoking in England. The charity says it remains the biggest cause of cancer-related deaths and is urging the government to do more to prevent young people from picking up the habit and to help current smokers quit.
Smoking-related issues tend to be multifactorial. In other words, they can be caused by a whole range of issues that may have nothing whatsoever to do with their smoking. I mean, there's obviously another group of people, of which I'm a member, which are people who are obese. So is the next step going to be to try and end obesity so that we save thousands more GP appointments?
Simon Clark, their Director of Forest Smoking. Now, the King and Queen Consort are in Colchester to celebrate its new city status. Colchester was awarded the city title during the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations last year. The couple will have visited the city's zoo and castle, as well as Colchester Library, where they've had tea with charities Age UK and the Silver Line. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Tamsin, thanks very much. So, Home Secretary Suella Braverman telling MPs that it would be betraying British voters not to tackle the waves, as she called them, of illegal migrants breaching our border. Suella Braverman saying the plan to prevent migrants using small boats to reach the UK, pushing the boundaries of international law, but insisting that action was needed because the asylum system was being overwhelmed, she said. The Home Secretary unveiling the plan to remove and then ban asylum seekers from re-entering the UK if they arrived through unauthorised routes or means. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, arguing that the new illegal migration bill will take back control of borders once and for all. Let's get more with our Home Security Editor, Mark White, who's at the Home Office for us. And Mark, just to explain to people, this is coming into action and it's retrospective as well. They won't be waiting for the bill to actually be enacted, if you like, in Parliament.
No, that's right. Anyone that comes across from today onwards will now be considered ineligible to claim asylum, except in a very small number of cases for those under the age of 18 and those who are either medically unfit to fly or they are assessed as being in real danger in terms of their safety if they were returned to their country of origin. Everyone else will no longer be eligible to claim asylum, and then a process will begin to remove them from the UK as soon as possible. But that is, of course, if the UK government gets this past the courts. The Home Secretary, in her announcement in the Commons, said that she was more than confident that this did meet with international laws, but those on the opposite side of the argument will believe that it actually infringes international laws, and they will test this in the courts over the months ahead. Of that, we can be in no doubt at all. And all the while, as the weather conditions improve in the English Channel, then these small boats will continue to cross. None have crossed today, but yesterday 197 people crossed in 5 small boats. On wasteland near Calais, another migrant camp has sprung up. Hundreds of tents and other makeshift structures have been erected, offering shelter to those planning to cross illegally to the UK in the days and weeks ahead. Further up the coast, the area's largest camp, along the railway tracks near Dunkirk, has now been cleared. Evidence that authorities here are certainly trying to disperse those planning to cross the Channel. On the UK side, the government is also stepping up the pressure. New legislation, which we're told will make claiming asylum all but impossible for those entering the UK illegally, and will include a lifetime ban on claiming asylum.
Mr. Speaker, people are dying in the Channel. The volume of illegal arrivals has overwhelmed our asylum system. The backlog has ballooned to over 160,000. The asylum system now costs the British taxpayer £3 billion a year. And when we try to remove them, they turn our generous asylum laws against us to prevent removal. The need for reform is obvious and is urgent.
After months of construction work, miles of security fencing is now in place around the beaches at Gravelly near Dunkirk, the site of many of the small boat launches. But in recent weeks, people smugglers have simply moved location. And many are sceptical that new legislation will make any real difference in managing a crisis that saw more than 45,000 people cross the Channel in flimsy inflatables last year.
The returns agreements are the nub on which the entire policy lands, and if that fails, if there aren't places to send all of these illegal immigrants that the government is planning to detain, then it will all fall apart and it will all be for naught. So that's a very important bit of the plan.
It's almost a year since then Prime Minister Boris Johnson made bold predictions about the government's new plan to send many asylum seekers to Rwanda. Since then, not a single flight has taken off for that country. However determined Rishi Sunak may be to ensure his plan has more success, it's certain there will be no end of challenges from those determined to block the government's latest proposals. Mark White, GB News. So the government says that the first priority in its new legislation will be to reduce the backlog, the number of people out there claiming asylum, still needing a decision, to reduce that backlog, and then once they get to a compatible size in terms of the numbers out there, they will then look at introducing a cap. And that may vary from year to year, depending on how council, local authorities across the country and other services are fixed in terms of being able to provide accommodation for asylum seekers, and also it will be dependent on world events. So the government says that it may be more flexible in opening up safe and legal routes, like they have done, of course, with Ukraine, like they did with Afghanistan as well.
OK, but clearly those legal routes are the details yet to be sort of worked out. And, of course, we've got this meeting with Macron in France, President Macron in France on Friday. Mark, at the Home Office for the moment, thank you for that. But let's now get the reflections of Steve Aldous-Simons, who's a refugee migrant rights Programme Director at Amnesty International. Steve, thanks for joining us once more. Just digging down in a bit more detail, I see that the Home Secretary actually told MPs the legislation will not be coming with a formal confirmation that it complies with human rights law, but without saying why.
Well, she has, I understand, said elsewhere that there is, in what I think are her words, a more than 50% chance that these laws aren't human rights compatible. But in the same breath, she says she's confident that they are. And I think actually it kind of reveals something rather fundamental, which is problematic about everything this Home Secretary does on this issue. She has confidence about things that even she acknowledges, at least privately, there's no basis to have true confidence about, whether their legality, their practicality, and all the while, our asylum system is being utterly trashed by the policies she pursues at huge cost to the taxpayer, and of course at great personal human cost to the people in that system. So I think this is quite a revelatory statement about her inability to say that this bill that she proposes is human rights compatible, even though she seeks to sort of make the statement that somehow or other she believes it is.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at the mechanics of it. I mean, some of our legal observers here are saying that really this doesn't work in practice unless you unlock the whole issue of Rwanda and get that safe haven and the channel, the third-party channel, moving. Because the question then, what happens to the people being detained after the 28 days? Yvette Cooper asking, are they just released onto the streets?
Well, I mean, this is at the heart of already the problem with the government's policy. It is pretending that somehow or other it will be able to expel tens of thousands of people to some other country or countries for those countries to take our asylum responsibilities on top of their own. Rwanda, as we have all been told, apparently is prepared at this time to receive a few dozen people. So where are the places for tens of thousands of people? And yes, if people are going to now be stuck in detention rather than hotels, that's neither going to be any cheaper, nor is it going to be any more effective for the system itself. And of course, it's going to do even more harm to the people incarcerated. So it's just more calamity on top of calamity.
The question asked in the Commons from the opposition as to why these people weren't claiming asylum in a safe country, a third-party country, such as France, when they're travelling through. And that is a valid question, isn't it? Why are they still wanting to come across the channel in the boats when they could actually try and get a safe haven and claim that basis, that legal basis, in France?
Well, it's certainly very important to ask the question why some people don't claim elsewhere, but come here to make their claims. And if we ask that question honestly, what we will see is that some people have clear connections here, and it's perfectly legitimate for them to want to, for example, make their claims where they have family and other connections. And other people do not get safely into the French asylum system. Only today, for example, you have the Times reporting on a 4-year-old and 6-year-old scrabbling around last night for a piece of wood for a makeshift shelter in northern France in Dunkirk. Is that anybody's idea of safety? None of it takes away from the fact that the French receive, and have for a very long time, very many more people into their system. Why can we not pull our finger out and take some real share of responsibility rather than this?
And what about the share of responsibility from the people smuggling gangs, the criminals? I mean, how would Amnesty International suggest that is tackled? Because clearly that is, in terms of the direct engine room, if you like, of getting these boats off the beaches of France and across here to Britain.
Well, Amnesty has no truck with criminal smuggling gangs and indeed human traffickers who hugely exploit people, often very violently as well, and do an awful lot of human damage. But the reality is that the policies that the government has been pursuing and still pursues are enabling those very criminal gangs, because what the government does is says, well, you have to get here if you want asylum here, no matter how much you're connected here, and we won't provide any route for you to be able to do that. So all that's left for people are people smugglers and the risk that they fall into the hands of traffickers. If you ever want to do anything about that, government is going to have to make safer routes available. It could start usefully by talking to the French and saying, look, we can see we should be taking more responsibility, and it's not useful for you or for us to have these dreadfully dangerous channel crossings. Let's identify some of the people in northern France whom should be able to claim asylum here. Let's make that possible for them and take away at least some of this dreadful business.
And of course, we've got that meeting with President Macron on Friday with the Prime Minister. So we shall see what's discussed at that time. But Steve, Refugee Migrant Rights Programme Director at Amnesty, thank you very much indeed for joining us on GB News once more. Let's now get the views of Francis Hoare, barrister and legal commentator, and has been looking at the legal do's and don'ts of this, because a lot of people are sort of looking and working out if this is actually doable.
Well, I mean, it's not so much whether it's doable, it's whether it will change anything at all. And I think I have to say that your previous guest is right to say that it's actually difficult to see how this does change anything, because one of the provisions which the Secretary of State says is significant and is a significant additional bar is that the person is a real danger to their life or safety. Well, that is precisely the test of what it is to be a refugee. A refugee must be somebody who is in real fear of persecution or of lack of protection by a state authority for one of a number of particular reasons. But in addition to that, Article 3 of the European Convention of Human Rights requires this country not to put somebody back into a country where they can be at risk of torture or cruel and inhuman punishment for any reason. So not just whether they are a member of a particular religious group or political persuasion and so on. That test, therefore, is very likely to be interpreted as being identical to the test that already applies. And I say very likely to be because the Human Rights Act requires the judges to interpret legislation in a matter that is in accordance with the convention. So what does that leave? It leaves those people who are at risk of, who are asylum seekers, genuinely asylum seekers, that is, say, genuinely have a fear of persecution, to be treated in exactly the same way they are now, and other people to be either returned to their country if that's possible or to Rwanda. And the Rwandan issue is problematic because it's not very clear whether or not that's going to happen at all. The fundamental problem which this government is not dealing with is actually a diplomatic problem, because where I depart from your previous guest is in the suggestion that this isn't an issue and in the suggestion that the smugglers are there and are being caused by government policy. The reality is that the smugglers will continue to smuggle for as long as they are able to get away with it. And they will be able to get away with it for as long as the French authorities allow them to do it. Because once they get onto the half of the English Channel, which is under British jurisdiction, we are incapable of putting them back in France without France's consent. What should happen is every single one of those boats should be scooped up by the French authorities and put back. All of those boats should be destroyed, and the French authorities should be, and perhaps the Dutch, and the Belgians, although more the French, should be destroying every boat that is capable of being used in that manner. That's what should be happening.
Let's reflect. They've tried that approach in terms of puncturing the boats as they're being launched from the beaches.
They haven't.
And they have, because Mark White, our correspondent, has actually been reporting. Let me just finish my point, if you will, Francis. Our correspondent, Mark White, has actually observed what was attempted on those beaches. The problem being, of course, that the coastline is so long. But let me get back to the legal issues.
Can I please come back on that? Because there's one thing that they don't do, and that is they do not get the boats, rescue the boats and put the people back in France. That's more important than destroying the boats, because it's all very well to say they destroy the boats. Boats can come from anywhere. What they need to do, the French authorities, the French Navy needs to blockade their coast and ensure that all of these migrants are put back in France for their own safety and also in order to ensure the border between the UK and France. That's what they're not doing, purposely not doing that.
Well, we'll see what President Macron decides with the Prime Minister on Friday. But I will reiterate that our own correspondent, Mark White, has seen the French puncturing the boats on those beaches. But there are, of course, large numbers. Let me return to the legal point, which is why you're speaking to us. And that is that the UK has this obligation to consider asylum claims. But how does it do that if it's actually denying people to make the asylum claim? It's a sort of Kafkaesque catch-22, isn't it?
Well, I'm not even convinced that this bill does that, because what the Secretary of State said today, I haven't read the bill, but I've heard what she said. What she said is that the exception to this bill will be those in a real danger to their life or safety. What does that mean? That means those people who either fear that they're at risk of persecution on refugee convention grounds, or those people who are at risk of torture or cruel and inhuman punishment. That's the current test. And that means that those people, the courts will have to decide whether they are. The tribunals, the first-tier tribunal will have to decide whether they are. That's what happens at the moment. So I fail to see how this makes very much difference to the status quo at all, actually.
OK, well, as we said to many of our other contributors, let's see what happens on Friday when the Prime Minister meets the President. Yeah, Francis Hawke, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you. Not this. Thank you.
Coming up, we'll be going through the latest row, no, not on migrants, over Sue Gray. All that coming up. More politics for you coming up shortly.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Plenty of politics for you today. We can't escape it because ministers now say that the Partygate investigator Sue Gray's unprecedented move to be Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer's chief of staff in his office may have breached civil service rules. Now, in the Commons yesterday, the Paymaster General Jeremy Quinn had raised 4 areas where senior civil servants may have fallen foul during exceptional situations. Well, now, Deputy Leader Labour Leader Angela Rayner has accused the Conservative MPs of pursuing conspiracy theories spread by former Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his allies. Let's get more with our Deputy Political Editor Tom Harwood, who's now at Westminster. It's spicing up a bit, Tom.
It certainly is. It was a very spicy back and forth across the chamber of the House of Commons yesterday afternoon, where Jeremy Quinn was asked this question by the esteemed backbencher Sir Robert Buckland, of course a former Attorney General himself. And it's worth going through the 4 points one by one, whereby the government believes there may well have been a serious breach of the Civil Service Code. And the Civil Service Code of Conduct is incredibly clear on these 4 points. The first of it is it's a duty of civil servants, particularly senior civil servants, to uphold impartiality. They must deserve and retain the confidence of ministers in that respect. Now, big questions as to whether Sue Gray has done that. Of course, crossing the floor, liaising with the opposition, and of course joining the opposition, or at least seemingly accepting this job. Does that really deserve and retain the confidence of ministers? Second of all is this seeking a COBA. Now, this is the Business Interests Council. They need to, senior civil servants need to seek a COBA approval before any job offer appointment is announced. Now, that did not happen in the case of Sue Gray, flouting that process. Number three is declaring interests that may lead to real or perceived conflicts of interest. Now, that could be declaring meetings, that could be declaring friendships, that could be declaring anything in that realm that could be leading to real or indeed perceived conflicts of interest. A real high bar there that it seems that Sue Gray may not have met in this instance. And finally, there needs to be a senior ministerial approval for contact between senior civil servants and the opposition. And the government is saying there was not ministerial approval for contact between Sue Gray and the opposition. It had not been sought and it had not been granted. Right. So those four serious potential breaches of the Code of Conduct for Civil Servants seem to be an incredibly a real prospect here that Sue Gray, who of course once was in charge of looking over these rules, has herself broken them.
Yes, of course, she can't afford to be a rule breaker given her position. I mean, she can't go public, of course, because that's the other issue with being a civil servant. She has to keep her counsel. However, one does reflect that Rachel Reeves in this session at the QE2 earlier, the Shadow Chancellor, stressing that the talks for her to be Chief of Staff had only started after the Partygate probe had concluded, she was saying.
Yes, this is the first specific bit of evidence that we've got from the Labour Party. You'll remember it was only yesterday that Sir Keir Starmer refused 6 times when questioned in the media to say when these discussions started. He was saying that this was going to be set out in the fullness of time by Sue Gray herself. Well, Rachel Reeves today has given us a little bit more detail there, that it was apparently after the Partygate investigation. However, we do not know the clear and real timings that this actually did take place, because the Partygate investigation had concluded for a considerable amount of time before the alleged meetings may well have happened. We don't know when precisely these meetings have happened yet. It's still an open question, and one that no doubt the Labour Party will be asked in greater detail about.
From Partygate to Greygate in one fell swoop. Tom at Westminster, thank you very much indeed for that. More reaction, of course, as we get it. Coming up too on GB News Live, the latest on the King and Queen Consort visiting Colchester and meeting Alice in Wonderland and the Mad Hatter. Explaining more in a moment. First news headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you. It's 2:32. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Home Secretary has told MPs in the House of Commons that it would betray British voters not to tackle the waves of illegal migrants breaching the border. Suella Braverman made the comments as she announced details of the new illegal migration bill, which would remove and ban from the UK people who enter illegally.
This bill enables detention of illegal arrivals without bail or judicial review within the first 28 days of detention until they can be removed. It puts a duty on the Home Secretary to remove illegal entrants and will radically narrow the number of challenges and appeals that can suspend removal. Only those under 18, medically unfit to fly, or at a real risk of serious and irreversible harm, an exceedingly high bar in the country we are removing them to, will be able to delay their removal. Any other claims will be heard remotely after removal.
Leaked WhatsApp messages suggest former Health Secretary Matt Hancock considered withholding funding for a learning disability centre to pressure an MP to back new COVID restrictions. The messages obtained by the Daily Telegraph showed Mr Hancock and an aide had discussed warning MP James Daly that the centre would be off the table if he rebelled. A spokesperson for Mr Hancock says what's being accused never happened. The trial of a man accused of murdering Olivia Pratt-Corbell has heard that she was shot after running downstairs, screaming to her mother that she was scared. 9-year-old Olivia died after a gunman fired into her home in Liverpool last August. Manchester Crown Court has been told the suspect, Thomas Cashman, had been lying in wait for his intended target on the evening of the shooting. He denies murder. The gender pay gap in the UK has widened, with men now paid 14.4% more than women. The accountancy firm PwC's report puts the increase down to a sharp rise in childcare costs, which has priced many women out of work altogether. It's warned at the rate the pay gap is closing, it will now take more than 50 years to reach gender pay parity. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Let's return to our top story now, that announcement of those new measures to try to curb illegal migration announced by the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, in the Commons. Let's speak now to Ben Hall, Europe editor for the Financial Times. And Ben, thanks very much indeed for talking to us, because, of course, this is the precursor to this visit by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to France to meet President Macron on Friday. What do you think the French will make of it?
Well, I think the French don't actually want this summit to be dominated by the small boats issue, because they feel that they've done quite a lot in recent months in terms of raising the number of police they're putting on patrol on the Channel coast, and they don't think there's a lot more they can do. I mean, the British government is obviously paying for that partly, but they will not like, I think, anything that looks like Britain is reneging on its international obligations, but they won't want this issue to dominate the summit.
Yeah, because, of course, we had some of those MPs asking why these people aren't claiming asylum in France as a country of safe haven as they're travelling through. And, of course, we've seen the pictures of, you know, the tented villages still, which is causing problems for many French residents still in Calais and Sangatte and so on.
Yep, there's still a problem in the north, although it's a lot less bad than it was. I suppose we should remember that France took a lot more refugees than the UK last year, 120,000 roughly.
Yeah,
so they take more than the UK does, and they would argue that there are big pull factors in the UK, including lax labour laws that makes the UK a draw for these people. They may have family connections. They may feel that this is the place that they feel safest and have the best opportunities in life as refugees or as economic migrants.
Yeah, and of course they don't have to have an identity card as you do in France to be able to function. But clearly there are questions about, are there more measures needed on the French side of the Channel, along the beaches and so on? Bearing in mind, of course, it's such a huge stretch of coastline now that these boats are being launched from, and the organisation, the criminal organisation behind it.
Yeah, the French have consistently argued that the coastline is too long for them to enforce just with boots on the beaches, if you like. Yeah. What they've wanted to do is get the British more involved in cooperating with European governments to do more to actually tackle the smuggling networks that are ferrying these people across and making huge amounts of money from, and tackling the problem that way, rather than just trying to enforce it through policing action on the beaches.
And what is the mood music? Because clearly after the Windsor framework and this sort of slightly more cordial entente, does it indicate that perhaps on Friday we may see real sort of movement on various issues, including this migration issue?
I think the mood music is very strong, very warm at the moment. They clearly, the French and other European governments see this as a sort of reset moment for Britain's relationship with its European partners. So I think they will try and make pragmatic steps forward in the relationship with closer cooperation. What they actually do on this issue, though, is a little bit unclear. I suspect there may be more pledges of funding from Britain and perhaps some extra resourcing from the French on that side. But there's not going to be any return agreement, I don't think, anytime soon between the French government and the British government or other European governments. So it's going to be step by step.
OK, Ben, thank you for joining us, bringing us your assessment. Ben Hall, Europe editor for Financial Times. Thanks very much indeed. Now, we were bringing you some pictures earlier on GB News Live of the King and Queen Consort arriving at Colchester. That's to mark Colchester's recently awarded city status back in November 2022. These were the scenes as they arrived. We saw one or two protests as they arrived, but nothing to actually interfere with the visit to what was a garrison town, but now a garrison city. Waves there to the waiting onlookers with the members, I think they're Royal Marines there, or on the left, or paratroopers actually. Majesty's meeting with local community groups, volunteers and local businesses. And during the visit, the couple are unveiling the name of Colchester Zoo's newest addition, a baby white rhino. I haven't got pictures of that at the moment because I think that's probably what you really want to see, isn't it? However, the Majesty is visiting Colchester Library to take afternoon tea with Age UK volunteers and meet broadcaster and children's author now, Dermot O'Leary, and author Frank Cottrell-Boyce, both hailing from the town. Well, let's get more with former Royal Correspondent Nicholas Owen, who's joining us there at home. And it's yet another successful walkabout with a very relaxed-looking King and Queen Consort, of course, ahead of the coronation, when we understand she may well become Queen rather than Queen Consort.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Mark. First thing I must, I don't think I've ever in all my years had to sort of correct anything that you've ever said, but it is a city, Colchester now. Very, very proud of that fact they are. And that's one of the reasons for this visit, to make sure they mark that. It was named a city during the Platinum Jubilee time. Yes, but indeed, I have been saying right from the start, as soon as Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth died and King Charles ascended the throne, that we should just call her Queen Camilla. And I've been doing that. A lot of other people have been doing that. But for the moment, she is the Queen Consort. But come the coronation, you're quite right. She's going to be apparently elevated just properly to the status of being the Queen. And I think most people will think that's just about the right thing to do at the right time.
And interesting that they've headed to the library to meet Dermot O'Leary, who's now an author as well as broadcaster, Frank Cottrell-Boyce as well, both from the area, who's an author, underlining how Camilla really cherishes books and publishing and the whole aspect of reading as well.
Yes, she's making this really her own thing, isn't she? Particularly with young people, saying how important it is that they get reading. Refreshing, really. And I also think, which is, for people of my generation anyway, is rather nice thing, actual books she's talking about. I mean, obviously, a lot of the reading is on screen these days, and very, that's all very well electronic, but she's a great fan of the actual books that children should have those in their hands. So she's playing a very, very important role. I must say about the protests, pretty mild, actually. Somebody shouting out, I think, "Why are you wasting our money?" Police will be on the lookout for other things. Of course, we've had a bit of egg throwing lately, haven't we?
Yeah.
I don't think we'll see that today. Don't think we'll see that.
No, our cameraman was on egg watch, and luckily the score sheet is 0. However, talking about spending or saving money, I mean, we are getting this indication about this the slimmed down monarchy, as they say, and perhaps not quite as extravagant a coronation as perhaps we could have had.
That's right. The coronation, I keep on talking going back to 1953, but I mean, it is a very long time ago.
The last one we had, of course, yeah.
Indeed, that was an absolutely amazing pageant. Do you know, if you stood on the street of any street in London to watch it pass, it took 45 minutes to go past you. And it was pouring with rain at the time, I have to say. But this time it said it won't be quite on that grand scale. It will be slimmed down. For example, there will obviously be members of the armed forces that are bound to be there in escorting, the household cavalry doing their usual job, providing the sovereign's escort, as it's called, very, very important to do all that. But what's likely to be missing this time, there won't be sort of lots of other guests trailing along behind. For example, if President Biden comes, some suggestion he won't actually come, got to do something else. But if people like him, world leaders, they'll be there at Westminster Abbey, but not apparently intended to walk in the procession. But just to say this quickly, what Buckingham Palace says is, well, don't worry too much. All right, the last coronation was an amazing event.
Yeah.
This will be the most spectacular thing we've seen on the streets of London since then. So it's still going to be a cracking display.
Yeah, and of course the whole paraphernalia of might not get the golden coach, we've been told, but being anointed with oil and so on, the very important part of it. However, it's another couple of American guests, of course, have been exercising the newspapers, whether they will be there. What's your take on this? I mean, suggestions they will be allowed back to Frogmore Cottage. Perhaps they'll get the use of the Duke of York's flat in Buckingham Palace, and the fact that the save the date has gone out to California.
Yeah, it's such a tricky one, this, isn't it? All we know so far, nothing official at all from this end. No one has said, no one in Buckingham Palace or anything like that has said, listen, we have definitely invited Harry and Meghan to be there at the coronation. But the confirmation, such as it is, has come from the other end, has come from California, saying we are in email touch to discuss May the 6th, which is the date.
Yeah.
That doesn't actually mean they've had an invitation, does it? I mean, it might well be hedged around with a lot of other things. Something on the lines of, we understand, of course, that you will be there. We'd be delighted to have you along, but please keep these lips a little on the sealed side in some diplomatic way. Now,
indeed,
we just don't know. We just don't know at the moment. It looks difficult. And as you quite rightly say, Mark, there is also the strange issue of property.
Yeah.
Because Harry and Meghan are no longer told that they can use Frogmore Cottage. 12 bedrooms it's got. Not my idea of a cottage. Still, there we go. So where will they actually go? Will they might swap over? Will Prince Andrew be in Frogmore Cottage by that time? Will there then be a room or two in Royal Lodge? Don't forget that Harry and Meghan, despite everything that Harry says about his upbringing and all the sad things that have happened to him, there's still very much a big operation whenever they move anywhere.
Yeah.
A lot of people come with them.
Yeah, and of course the security considerations as well. News just in, we can tell everyone that the white rhino is called Dara. That's the name that's been released, but we still haven't got the pictures, which is what everybody's been waiting for. However, Nicholas, thank you for your time. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you, of course, at the coronation as well. Thank you very much indeed.
Bye-bye.
Now, fans battling it out, well, not for a seat at the coronation, but at the Eurovision Song Contest in Liverpool. Tickets going on sale today. They sold out within 36 minutes. The website, yes, it crashed. 9 shows being staged at the Liverpool Centre there, with a semi-final, dress rehearsals and the live grand final on 13th of May. So around 6,000 tickets per show, all going, ranging from 30 quid to 380. But it's the cost of the hotel rooms as well rocketing due to the anticipated demand. Well, joining us now is Eurovision superfan Richard Salkeld. Have you managed to get a ticket, Richard? That's the big question.
Sadly, Mark, like many tens of thousands of Eurovision fans across the country, not yet, but remaining optimistic.
OK, and interesting, I think people thought, it was just the Eurovision show, but we're now learning about all these sort of, dress rehearsals as such in the semi-final, so there's plenty of opportunity for people to see them getting ready for the big night.
Absolutely, Mark. Over the decades, Eurovision has evolved and become something of a beast in the entertainment calendar. So, as you say, there's 9 events across the week, beginning on the Tuesday the 9th with the first semi-final, the second on the Thursday the 11th, culminating with the final itself on the night of Saturday the 13th of May, just a few days after the coronation you're just talking to Nicholas about. But also there's the rehearsals as well, which are a big money spinner. So serious fans can attend the dress rehearsals on the afternoons and the days in between. And Liverpool are also arranging a special 2-week festival with a fan zone for up to 25,000 fans. So this really will be a significant event, attracting people from around the world. Of course, watched by 160 million viewers. It will be a spectacle across the week, not just the Saturday itself.
Yeah, and you talk about the serious aspect and the bit of fun. I mean, there is the fact that, of course, this is being hosted on behalf of Ukraine, and therefore there is this political message that's being relayed to the rest of the world as well.
Absolutely, and Eurovision organisers are always at pains to highlight the fact that Eurovision isn't political. Inevitably, with what we're seeing in Ukraine at the moment, there is that sense of support for Ukraine. I remember speaking to GBNews in Turin at the Eurovision Song Contest last year, and it was clear that Ukraine was going to be the outright winner, with, of course, the UK, as it did come, second in the running, and as such is hosting it with support from Ukraine this year. So I think we will see a real injection of support, a real flavour of Ukrainian culture, and that's very much coming across in the some of the images you've been showing there, the colours representing the song contest theme that's already been adorned across various public buildings in Liverpool as part of the run-up.
Indeed. Well, Richard, thank you for that. We're now actually going to bring Liverpool in now, and we can speak to Dave Wibberley, Head of Management at the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts, of course, which I think I'm right in saying was set up by Paul McCartney, his former alma mater, the Liverpool Institute, and George Harrison as well. So there's this huge musical legacy that's behind this as well.
Yes, it is. The city is absolutely buzzing. This morning, students and staff, it's been hard to get them to work because everyone's been trying to get tickets. So it's taken over the whole city.
Yeah, Mersey beat, of course, we remember, and it's still loud and strong. What will Liverpool make of the slightly different musical genres, if we can put it that way politely, that we see with Eurovision?
Oh, listen, Eurovision's very much at home in Liverpool. This is a pop city. You know, this is the capital of pop. And there's nothing more pop than Eurovision. And we've got a very big and a very prominent LGBTQ community. And we're going to paint the town many shades of red. It's going to completely embrace the city. But also, as a city, we're turning it into a 2-week cultural festival. It's not just about Eurovision for us. You know, give us half a chance and we'll turn it into a major party. So from the 1st to the 14th of May, things are going to be happening here. Including the English National Opera are going to be doing an operatic Eurovision. We've got a glitter ball jellyfish, and students here at LIPA are also taking over the cavern because we've got so many international students that we're going to be presenting our own Eurovision down at the cavern.
OK. And I gather that Ukrainian refugees are being offered cut-price tickets, I think about £20 to get to see Eurovision. And I guess that's the other aspect, that Liverpool will be welcoming many of these Ukrainian people to help celebrate the event.
Absolutely. We have some Ukrainian students here at LIPA, and over the past year, they've been themselves organising events to raise funds for those who've been hurt by the war. And yes, Liverpool is a very welcoming and friendly place. So those Ukrainians who come to Liverpool to celebrate this will feel the warmth of the city.
OK. Just one aspect, though. There have been suggestions that the hotel prices are getting a little bit pricey, which I guess is inevitable for any city where you get lots of people coming in. I mean, has there been some reaction locally to that?
I will say I'm not aware of it, but yeah, obviously there's only X amount of hotel rooms. Simple supply and demand means it's going to go up. But I tell you what, I think there's going to be a lot of spare rooms getting hired out.
Yes, and perhaps a few visits to the Cavern as well, and of course all those Beatles tours where people can follow in the steps of the great and wonderful John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison and Ringo Starr, of course. But thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Dave, and we wish your students well, of course, performing in those 2 weeks. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
And we'll be back, of course, to Liverpool when that all happens and updating you on all the celebrations. But let's see what you've been telling us about with your views coming into our inbox today. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Leslie, about the small boats crisis. Britain is a small island country, struggling in many areas. Housing which our own children cannot get, the NHS. Why should our own people keep suffering to house criminals who choose to take the illegal route into Britain? Question mark. On to Dave. Clearly, they do not look for safe countries, but look for the ones with the best benefits. They're clearly economic migrants, in his view. And then, of course, all those other aspects saying, well, we should be welcoming genuine refugees. Keep the views coming. Stay with us. GB News Live, back with you tomorrow. Patrick is next.
Good afternoon, I'm Alex Deegan, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. A very wintry week of weather. We have Met Office warnings in place for snow and ice for today, tomorrow, Thursday and Friday. Cold air has followed on behind this cold front. These weather fronts, though, are never too far away from the south. So it's in the south where we are most likely to see some disruptive snow during Wednesday. Still snow showers coming in across northern Scotland, though, through the rest of this evening. Things likely to be turning icy here as well. And in the south, those weather fronts just pushing back in, bringing some sleet and snow through the night across southern counties of England. So also here, potentially icy with perhaps a centimetre or two you could wake up to in some spots first thing. For most, it's just a dry, clear and very cold night. Could get down to minus 15 through some sheltered Scottish glens and minus 5 to minus 6 even in towns and cities across the north. Into tomorrow, and this zone across the south will see a couple of pulses of wet weather that could provide further snow. Somewhat hit and miss, certainly in the morning across the southeast, but there could be a centimetre or two, and then pepping up again in the southwest during Wednesday afternoon, bringing some snowfall perhaps into parts of South Wales, the South Midlands and Southwest England, although it may turn back to rain here as milder air tries to push in. Could get to double figures here, but elsewhere it's a cold day. For many, it's just a sunny day across northern England, Northern Ireland, much of Scotland, and there won't be as many snow showers in northern Scotland either. But the risk is further south for sleet and snow, particularly through Wednesday evening. South Wales, parts of the South Midlands and southern counties of England. Again, a few centimetres, possibly a bit more than that in one or two spots, particularly on high ground. So further pulses of sleet and snow in the south as we head into Wednesday night. That low clears away, those weather fronts clear away, but then another one comes in, and this one brings the snow risk further north. This is Thursday and Friday, parts of northern England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Goodbye.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't